We now come to the second Opposition Day motion relating to fixed odds betting terminals in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. I have to inform the House that will honourable members leaving or entering the chamber please do so quietly. I have to inform the House that Mr. Speaker has selected the amendment in the name of the Prime Minister. I call Clive Efford to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the motion that stands in the name of my right honourable friend and the Leader of the Opposition. Madam Deputy Speaker, many people across the country are concerned about the impact of betting shops on their high streets. They're concerned that they are clustering in close proximity to one another and too often close to communities with high levels of deprivation. We are not suggesting that there is a problem in every community, which is why we're not proposing the government introduces a blanket ban. Instead, we are calling for local councillors to be given powers that enable them to respond to the concerns of their local communities, giving them real powers to act responsibly in the interests of the people who elect them. Too often we hear of councillors being frustrated because they are unable to support local residents. Time after time, local people turn up at planning or licensing meetings to watch in disbelief as councillors they know oppose the plans are forced to let another betting shop open because the legal process favours the lawyers representing the interests of the betting shops. This cannot go on. It causes people to lose faith in local democracy, and we will stop it. Councillors must be allowed some discretion and not be expected to simply rubber stamp such applications. Yes, of course I give away.
For giving way, I chaired the local licensing authority in the City of Hull when the Gambling Act 2005 was brought in, and we were absolutely frustrated, as the honourable gentleman suggests. Will he now take the opportunity to apologise to the House for that legislation which provided local councillors such as me with no discretion at all?
The legislation that brought in FOBT machines actually predates the Gambling Act, but we limited through the Gambling Act the number of machines to 4 per shop. What's unprecedented is the fact that the money that can be made from these machines has overtaken the money that can be taken from over-the-counter betting, which is what is driving the clustering of betting shops in our high streets, and it is that this government is refusing to deal with. The government must also accept there are more betting shops close to areas of high deprivation, and this is also borne out by the research. If I can just finish this point, and I will certainly give way. A report looking at machine density by experts in gambling, including Heather Wardle, who leads the key studies such as the Gambling Prevalence Survey, says the distribution of gambling machines in Great Britain displays a significant association with areas of social economic deprivation. The profile of the resident population living in high-density machine zones mirrors the profile of those most at risk of experiencing harm from gambling. So we cannot stand back and allow this to continue. I'll give way.
Thanks. I'm grateful to honourable friend for giving way. There's actually one fixed odds betting terminal in my constituency for every 700 people who are eligible to play them, the vast bulk in areas of high deprivation. In Broadland, a southern constituency, there's one machine for every 18,300 people. Is this not a clear confirmation that it is the poor who are being targeted with this empty promise of great wealth, and we need to do something about it?
Sadly, that is repeated in too many places across the country, and it's time the government recognised that this problem can only be dealt with at a local level. I did say I'd give way, and I will come to you, Honourable Gentleman.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He's making a powerful case about how betting shops and these fixed odds betting terminals are proliferating in some of our most deprived areas, and we have 70 in Brighton Pavilion alone. But does he share my concern that we now hear that some betting shops are cutting hourly wages but offering the chance to their staff to make up that loss if the staff increase profits from these machines? Is that not absolutely unacceptable?
It is, and it does fly in the face of what the betting industry do claim in terms of training training their staff to actually deal with problem gambling, and at the same time as incentivising them to encourage people to gamble more. I will give way, but I did promise the honourable gentleman up there, and I'll certainly give way on the opposite side.
Him keeping his promise. The Salvation Army has sent a briefing saying that since the 2005 Gambling Act came into force, the total number of gambling addicts increased by more than 50% in 3 years between 2007 and 2010, a rise of 115,000. What, or more personally, who is responsible for that?
Well, it's a very the question is actually capable of a debate in itself, because there are many forms of gambling. There are many forms of gambling where people can become addicts, particularly the growth of online gambling, which has grown to an industry of 2 billion over the last few years. So it's very difficult to extrapolate who is actually responsible, but I'm certainly concerned that we do the appropriate research into the impact of FOBT machines on problem gambling. I'll give way to my honourable friend. I'll come round.
I can see why the
Order. To which honourable gentleman is the?
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend. See why the government backbenchers want to deviate from the subject, because this is about deprivation. This is about targeting poor communities. There are 136 machines. 136 machines in my constituency. That's double the number in prosperous constituencies neighbouring it. This is the betting industry targeting the poor.
Well, I certainly think that these machines are an example of Cameron's Britain, where there's one rule for our constituents and another for the big businesses that run the betting shops. So give way to my honourable friend.
Will my honourable friend agree? In my own constituency of Huddersfield, we have 28 bookies shops. In 2012, £102 million was bet and 3 million lost. That is a scourge on our community, and it's just vacuuming money out of our community. I don't agree actually with the motion. I think we should get rid of these iniquitous organisations.
Well, the motion actually addresses the concern that my honourable friend is expressing in terms of allowing local councillors to make decisions about the economic activity that takes place in our town centres. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman. He's been on his feet for some time.
Shadow Minister for giving way, and I do admire his guile in bringing this debate forward to the House today, but aren't the facts speaking for themselves? In 2000 there were no fixed odd betting terminals in the UK, and by the time his party left office there were 30,000 of them. And isn't the truth that the most dangerous gamble facing the British public is if they were to ever consider voting Labour at the next general election?
Well, you know, I'll let the Conservatives in on something. You know, the world changes. You know, since the year 2000, we now have a £2 billion online gambling industry. The gambling industry is evolving. When we passed the 2005 Gambling Act, we made it quite clear that these FOBT machines in betting shops were under probation and that we would keep them under review. And we are saying the time has come to deal with that situation, and this government is refusing to do it.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I think I would agree with him that the party opposite seem to not be taking any responsibility for things that are happening under their watch. Things that are happening under their watch. And I would just like to add some further evidence to the issue of deprivation and
Order. The honourable lady will be brief, but she must be heard. Lucy Powell.
Forgive me, I did think they were in government, Mr. Speaker. But in my constituency, which is one of the most deprived constituencies in the country, last year alone, there was £190 million spent on these machines. That's more than the council spent on services in my constituency. And in one ward alone, there are 500 of these machines now. What local councils need are more powers.
Well, I think all the examples that we're hearing, the one we just heard from my right honourable friend, shows the problem of clustering. The honourable gentleman has been determined to get in. I will give him his opportunity.
Mrs Merton, what first attracted the multi-millionaire Peter Coates, chairman of Bet365, to the Labour Party with a £400,000 donation, £100,000 of which in the 12 months after the passage of the Gambling Act 2005?
Well, Bet365 is an online gambling industry which we're not dealing with today, but can I say? Mr. Coates' company is one of the few companies that stayed in the UK, employs people in the UK, and pays taxes in the UK, which is more than can be said for Lord Ashcroft.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. When we introduced the legislation that resulted in these machines, we were not aware and could not have been aware of these unintended consequences. Now that we are, we call on the government which has the power to act, and they should do something about it, and do something about it now.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. If I could just make a little bit of progress, and I will give away some more. Now, the government has consistently said, problem, what problem? Well, they may not be aware of the problem, but the people in our communities are, and they want action. This issue, the issues that people have complained about are numerous. Many have complained of crime and antisocial behaviour associated with betting shops, others about clustering and their detrimental impact on the character and diversity of our high streets. In her reports on our high streets, in a moment, commissioned by the government in 2011, Mary Portas says the influx of betting shops, often in more deprived areas, is blighting our high streets. So the government is aware of the concerns, yet they have consistently refused to give local people powers to stop new shops opening in their communities. There is widespread support for what we are calling for from local government. In 2012, the Local Government Association commissioned an opinion poll on people's attitudes to planning and our high streets, and it found that more than 2/3 of local people, 68%, are against existing rules that allow betting shops to take over banks, building societies without planning permission. Yes, I'll give way.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way, and he's making a powerful case. The Tote has its headquarters in my constituency. Is he as aware as I am that the people who feel most strongly about this are the staff that work in those betting shops, who see problem gambling happening and are determined that there should be powers locally so that somebody can do something about that?
Absolutely. The people who represent the staff in the betting industry have been very vocal on the issue, not only of the concerns about the safety of those staff due to single staffing of the premises, but also the training that's available, which the betting industry, to be fair to them, have come to a bit late, but they have started to introduce training for their staff on that particular issue. But they have to create the environment where that can be effective. Yes, it's certainly good.
I wonder if he could just help me. How would stopping new shops prevent addictive gambling when we've heard there are already so many shops out there, and when we know that for the last 3 years of the Labour government, when there's a very real problem, they didn't think anything could be done about it?
I'm sorry to disappoint the Honourable Gentleman, but I think he's been lured by the briefings that he's got from his own side. This motion is not about problem gambling. This motion is about giving powers to local authorities to deal with the proliferation of betting shops in their high streets for planning reasons, for economic regeneration reasons, as well as concerns about the social impact of FOBT machines. We are not attempting to suggest that this motion that's before the House today is going to solve problem gambling in relation to FOBT machines. Far from it. And the Prime Minister was very mistaken in what he said today in answer to the Leader of the Opposition's questions on that matter. Yes, I will. Give way.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and can I agree with him that the debate this afternoon, with all the evidence and experience that's been expressed, especially on this side, and with the evidence that the Shadow Minister is deploying in the debate, puts paid to the argument used by the Prime Minister this afternoon that we need evidence. We need action, and we need it now.
I'll come to the evidence later in my speech, because what's been said about that today really needs to be clarified. Now, there is widespread support for people who oppose the government's position on this. Back in 2012, when the Local Government Association published the conclusions of its opinion poll, Sir Merrick Cockle, then chairman of the Local Government Association and former Conservative leader of Kensington and Chelsea, said, "This opinion poll shows local people want government to give councils powers to tackle unsightly clusters of sex shops, bookies and takeaways that can blight so many of our high streets. People want action, so the places where they live, work, shop can be revitalised to reflect how they want them to look and feel. The government has talked about localism, but they don't grant the powers even when they're asked to do so by their own colleagues. Now, I assume they have heard of a character called Boris Johnson. He's the Mayor for London. In a moment, his office issued a statement on this issue of betting shops. They said they have grown in number with an increased supply of premises such as vacant banks and pubs that do not require planning permission to be used as a betting shop. Betting firms are attracted to busy high streets and town centres with a ready supply of such premises. This has resulted in clustering in less prosperous areas like Hackney, which has 64 betting shops in the borough, 8 in Mayor Street alone, and Deptford, my honourable friend, has 7 betting shops in one street. So, the would-be leader of the Conservatives supports our view, and his statement goes on to say, the Mayor proposes that betting shop operators wishing to open up a new outlet should be required to apply for planning permission for the chosen premises, which would allow proper consideration to be given to each proposal for a betting shop and its effect on individual centres. So the Conservative chairman of Local Government Association and the Tory Mayor for London are both calling for the government to act. In fact, it's hard to find anyone who supports the view of the government. Local people want powers, the local government want more powers, and the 2 highest ranking Tories in local government want them to act as well. Everyone seems in agreement except for the government. Well, except parts of the government, because we've had another Liberal Democrat pledge. They've been at it again. You'd think that they'd have learnt their lesson over university tuition fees, but once the flashbulbs start to pop in, they cannot hold themselves back, and they have been photographed saying, ban the FOBTs at Liberal Democrat conference. The Deputy Prime Minister, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, the Minister of State at the Home Office, the Honourable Member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk, the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, the Member for East Dunbartonshire, the Minister of State for Department for Education and the Cabinet Office, and the Honourable Member for Norwich. All of them photographed backing anti-FOBT campaigners. They also passed a motion at their conference in September. And what does it call for? Local councillors to be empowered to decide whether or not to give approval to additional gambling venues in their community, and for betting shops to be put in their own separate planning use class. This was not a motion that was put up by some fringe group, it was put up by the Liberal Chief Whip. I give way.
I'm grateful for the honourable member giving way. I am strongly opposed to FOBT machines in betting shops, but my opposition is governed by their impact on addiction and the complex interactions of addiction. The Shadow Minister, Madam Deputy, said that was not part of his motion today, and I'm wondering, is he motivated at all by the addiction issue, and if he is, why was he not including that in his motion?
I'll come to that, and I'll explain later on in my speech just exactly what my position is on stakes and prizes, because it hasn't changed for 2 years, and I've been consistently making the argument about stakes and prizes, and I will come to that, and I'll give him a response. I'll give way.
The honourable gentleman for giving away. He does talk about local government, but will he recognise that there are powers using the Article 4, which both Barking and Southwark Council have chosen to do? I appreciate maybe a bit cumbersome, but there are definitely powers available now that councils can use.
The honourable lady will be patient. I'll come and I will deal with Article 4 directions. Now, it's time to stop posing for photographs, I should say to the Liberal Democrats, and posturing with fine words in motions at your conference. Lib Dem MPs are clearly confused, so let me make it clear to them. Today, They are either deciding whether to empower local authorities to can take control of their high streets, as they said they would at their conference, and back their councillors and members of your party and your chief whip, or you are voting along with the gambling industry. You've made your claims, now stand up for them today. Now let me turn to the words of the Minister when she commented on our choice of topic for today's Opposition Day debate. Now the Minister has claimed that my position contradicts the need for research. She said just a few weeks ago, Clive Efford, that's me, Madam Deputy Speaker, but it's in the quote, said that there was no evidence to support a change in the stake and prize levels for FOBTs. Yet now he is trotting out a totally contradictory line written for him by his political masters. Well, now, I know she's not been in the job for long, but she really ought to get a better grip of her brief, because there is nothing in this motion today about stakes and prizes. She should know that early last year, in response to the triennial review of stakes and prizes, I called for the changes to be made to the software of these machines, all of which are in this motion today. Longer periods between play, pop-ups to break play and remind people how long they have been playing, requiring people to load the machines over the counter to force interaction with staff, to give staff the opportunity to interact with customers who may be gambling too much, and an end to single staffing. We have been consistent on these issues, but we have had nothing from the government except some Lib Dems posing for some photographs.
On the question of addictive gambling, my honourable friend knows that I have raised, and with the help of the Daily Record, exposed the fact that I have an addictive gambler who is banned from every betting shop within 10 miles. Can walk into any of these shops and play these fixed odds betting terminals, because there's no one he talks to, no one vets him being in there, and he gambles his wages away every week.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and there is a need for technology to be used to protect problem gambling, and that also is something that we've consistently been raising. Now, perhaps the most damning fact is the government's certainly give way to the honourable gentleman. How could I not give way to the honourable gentleman who has so much knowledge of the gambling industry? I've got to certainly give way.
I'm grateful, Madam. I refer people to my entry in the Register of Members' Interest. Well, can I ask the Shadow Minister what his position is on this particular issue? Because he's always supported the research that's being carried out by the Responsible Gambling Trust, which actually has, as part of it, his honourable friend, the member for Bradford South, on it. So I'm sure he has every confidence in it. He's always supported that and waited for that, or said that we should wait for that research to take place. So why is it that he supports the research but isn't prepared to wait for it? Isn't that a ridiculous state of affairs?
Well, I repeat, today's motion is not about stakes and prizes. It is about empowering local authorities who are calling for powers to deal with a wide range of issues that go beyond just gambling. It's about economic regeneration. It's about economic vitality and diversity in town centres. It's about the concern that clustering of betting shops in town centres is having on the character of those town centres. I will deal with the issue about research later on in my speech, and I will come to it very soon if honourable members are patient. Oh yes, definitely give way.
Well, I'm grateful for the honourable member giving way. Could he explain to the House how he expects this motion to allow local authorities to deal with the current situation of having far too many of these shops, and why isn't the motion about the odds and the stakes, because that's the important issue?
Well, the honourable gentleman, on the issue of stakes and prizes, I will come to that, but it is a very complex issue and it will take a great deal of time to explain. But this motion does call for extra licensing powers, a change in the law, and it will be a very difficult piece of legislation, I accept, to go back retrospectively and take licences away from betting shops for these machines. But our motion does include that. So if it's what he's calling for, he can vote with us today. Now, perhaps the most damning fact is the government's claim that councils have the powers to stop the clustering of betting shops. And again, in her comments on today's debate, the Shadow Minister said councils already have planning powers The Minister, sorry, I'm just getting ahead of myself, I'm about 18 months too early. Councillors already have planning powers to tackle the proliferation of betting shops, as well as licensing powers to tackle individual premises causing problems, and we have already acted to ensure the industry puts in place the types of player protection measures that Labour are now at long last calling for. Now, if that is the case, why do councils such as Newham have to go to court to try and stop more betting shops opening in their area? Why are there so many local councils passing motions calling for more powers? Now, here is Sir Bob in Wales, who responded to the comments of the Honourable Lady yesterday. He said current legislation leaves councils effectively powerless in their ability to tackle the clustering of betting outlets, which causes immeasurable harm to local communities and the high street. The only planning power available to councils on Article 4 direction is unwieldy and slow, and some betting shops don't even require planning permission to open. In 2004, Merrick Cockle described Article 4 directions as unwieldy and bureaucratic. The Local Government Association view of Article 4 powers from the same year are equally negative. Article 4 directions are costly, complex to use. Local authorities need to give notice of restrictions coming into effect a year to avoid being at risk of paying compensation. This is an obvious disincentive to the widespread use of Article 4 directions by local planning authorities, which undermines the effectiveness of this measure. Article 4 directions can also only be used across a whole use class, meaning they cannot even be used when a bank becomes a betting shop. So no doubt the Minister will say in her response that this is all Labour's fault. Now, in fact, she said just that. I'll give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Is he as surprised as I am as to the fact that the opposition seem to be objecting to this very simple proposal, which is to give the local authorities more powers as to be able to decide whether they should have these or not, something which the local authorities are wanting. It's not a controversial issue, and I'm surprised that they are objecting to it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Why aren't they giving the power? They claim to be the party of localism and they do nothing. Now, no doubt, if you don't mind, I've got to come to a conclusion because there are lots of people who want to come in today. I know it's upsetting you what I've got to say, but you're going to hear it all, I'm afraid. Now, no doubt the Minister will say in her response that this is all Labour's fault. In fact, she has said just that. Any concerns about fixed odd betting machines should be laid firmly at Labour's door, is what she said. In 2000, these machines did not exist, but by the time of the last general election, there were over 30,000 of them. FOBTs appeared in shops in 2001. In 2005, we put a limit on them of 4 per shop. The Secretary of State set out at that time, the Honourable Member for Norwood set out at that time that at the second reading of the Gambling Act that the impact of these machines would be kept under review. And my honourable friend for Bradford South made it clear in 2009 that he was going to do just that. So it's no good going back to 2005 because the world has moved on. Online gambling has gone from nothing to £2 billion a year, and the government rejected our proposals to regulate on that, so we will take no lessons from this government.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way. In 2009, I did call for the things to be looked at again in terms of FOBTs, but I also called for the industry to distribute £5 million to the Responsibility in Gambling Trust to look at problem gambling. And I hope that my honourable friend will admire the work of the Responsibility in Gambling Trust, a charity that's set up of 5 independent directors and 5 directors from the industry.
Absolutely. The eminent people on the Responsible Gambling Trust, and I really endorse what my right honourable friend has to say. But I do have something to say about the research. Now, the concerns that people have about FOBT machines and their impact on betting shops are having on our communities is not just about gambling. We will wait for a proper research, but she needs to, the Minister needs to understand that saying we will wait for research and then doing nothing to gather the information we need to make make informed decisions is just not good enough. Now, after all, it's the government that scrapped the gambling prevalence survey. Now, let me quote a press release to a little bit more. This government is undertaking the biggest ever study into the effect of these machines and have made clear that we will not hesitate to take action if the evidence points in that direction. To act without evidence is inappropriate and extraordinarily cynical, even by Labour's standards. Well, the government is deluding itself if it thinks all the answers will come from the current study. NatSen published a scoping report in December which clearly states across the Category B estate in Great Britain there is a great deal of inconsistency in the level and type of data collected. This means that the information that is available for the responsibility in gambling trusts to give us the information that we need to make informed decisions when this research is completed next autumn will be seriously undermined. So as she well knows, this report will come out 6 months away from a general election, and we will have an inconclusive report because the data is not robust enough to make informed decisions on FOBTs. I'll give away to the Honourable Gentleman. Last time I'll give away.
I'm grateful to giving way. In his motion, he says that the Labour Party says that local authorities should have the power to licence the number of FOBTs within existing betting shops now. So could he confirm that would allow a local authority to increase the number of FOBTs per shop on the high street today?
No, because we wouldn't allow the cap beyond 4 per shop. We don't think that. It says that they will have to limit the number of motion, but we certainly would not lift the cap. No, I certainly would not lift the cap. I'll give way. Go.
To the Shadow Minister for giving way. I just wonder if he could clarify on the powers he's seeking from local authorities to have. Is he seeking to have those powers made retrospective so they can remove planning permission for existing betting shops?
No, what we're saying is that we are going to place betting shops in their own class category so that the local councils will have to receive a planning application if someone wants to open a new betting shop. Now, today's vote is not about stakes and prizes. It's about putting power back in the hands of local communities and the councillors that they represent. And the councillors that represent them. Taking decisions in the face of opposition from the betting industry will be tough for local councillors, particularly when it comes to removing existing machines. I happen to believe passionately in local democracy. I spent 12 years as a locally elected councillor, and I believe well-informed local councillors are capable of making important decisions that benefit their communities. I believe that too often we here in Westminster have tied the hands of locally elected representatives. It's time to put local people before the vested interests of the powerful betting industry, and we should put the trust in local democracy.
The question is, as on the order paper, I have to inform the House that Mr. Speaker has selected the amendment in the name of the Prime Minister. The question is, as on the order paper, but before I call the Minister to move the amendment, it might be helpful to the House to know that I'm obliged to put a limit of 4 minutes on the length of speeches from the back benches, because there is a very considerable demand for time to speak this afternoon. I call the Minister, Helen Grant, to move the amendment in the name of the government.
I beg to move the amendment standing on the order paper in the name of the Prime Minister and my right honourable and honourable friends. Madam Deputy Speaker, I actually find it remarkable that we're all here today, and I'd like to remind the House that 17 years ago, fixed odds betting terminals did not exist. Then the Labour government came to power and liberalisation began, and the 2005 Gambling Act came about. And by the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the last general election, there were more than 30,000 fixed odds betting terminals in existence. And yet we find ourselves here today debating what this government should do about them, discussing how we should clear up Labour's mess again. And I do actually find this rank hypocrisy, total cynicism and great opportunism. Yes, I do think these machines are concerning, but the silence of the Labour Party on this topic before they ended up in opposition is quite deafening. They brought these machines into being, yet they've got the audacity to sit here with a motion that seeks to blame this government for any harm they might cause. I will give way.
Well, I am very clear that the mess was created by the previous government, and I really don't accept excuses about not knowing what the consequences were likely to be. However, I would ask my honourable friend, we do seem to have the solution in our hands in the form of our Localism Act. Is it not possible to empower our local communities through their local elected representatives to use something like saturation as a reason for saying that they really cannot sustain anymore?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a very good point, and I will, as I progress with my speech, talk about the powers that local authorities have, including Article 4 directions. But I do think she makes a very interesting point. But before we get on,
I'm grateful to Honourable Lady. She's accused my side of cynicism and opportunism. However, cynicism and opportunism are the besetting sins of politicians. But what my constituents want to know is what are we as a House going to do about the betting shop scourge? In one of the main roads in Hackney, Mare Street, 8 betting shops full of these machines. Something must be done.
I can see that the Honourable Lady is concerned, and if she bears with me, I will explain exactly what this government is doing. This is the government that has pushed for the research. This is the government that's doing the research, and this is the government that's actually pushing the industry to provide the data that we need to really tackle problem gambling. But before I deal with her point, I do want to tell the House what this government is actually doing in a little more detail. Quite right. This government conducted a review of gaming machines' stake and prize limits last year and looked very closely at the available evidence about fixed odds betting terminals. In particular, our review looked at evidence to support claims that these machines present an elevated risk of gambling-related harm. The review found that there are real concerns about fixed odds betting terminals and that some players have experienced considerable harm in using them. This government therefore concluded that the future of these machines is unresolved, and we are undertaking urgent work to establish how these machines can be made safer, especially to those individuals who may be at the greatest risk.
Minister for giving way, and I agree with her that we've learned a lot from the introduction of these terminals. The BBC tease today highlighted the fact that a 17-year-old boy is already addicted to these, and he's just one of many lives that are being damaged, yet the betting industry seem to think it's okay to have single-person staffing with no support in their betting shops. Isn't this an illustration that they're putting profit before the interests of the people they call their customers?
No, I don't accept what the honourable member has to say about this matter. And the Gambling Commission, as he's well aware, makes it a requirement that underage individuals aren't allowed to gamble in licensed betting shops. And obviously, if these rules and conditions are breached, then the operator is at risk of losing their licence. But I will develop the argument further and say a little bit more about staffing and security and numbers in betting shops as I progress. The motion, Madam Deputy Speaker, before us raises a wide range of issues but fails completely to focus on the evidence and activity that is well underway. In order to make appropriate decisions around fixed odds betting terminals, we need to better understand how they're used and the real impact on players. And that's why the UK is conducting the largest ever programme of research research into gaming machine usage. The opposition acknowledged, notwithstanding what the Shadow Minister said in his opening speech, that there is insufficient evidence to support a reduction in stakes and prizes. This is why we've focused our attention on improving the evidence base so that we can determine whether a reduction in speed of play or a reduction in maximum stake will make these machines safer.
I'm very grateful. I was taught at an early age the only thing you need to know about the bookies is there are 4 windows where you pay in and 1 window where they pay out. Surely education is one of the solutions to this problem, and will she assure the House that she'll do all she can to make sure the gaming industry does what it can to educate its customers?
I think my honourable friend makes a very, very good point, and I had the big 5 betting operators in to see me in December, and I can reassure him that player education within player protection is something that they're very mindful of and do actually want to progress and do more for. Yes, I will. I want to make a little bit of progress, but it's therefore of crucial importance that interventions to make these machines safer are based on an understanding of what measures are likely to be effective rather than simple, irrational, knee-jerk reaction.
I'm extremely grateful to the Minister, and I'm following carefully what she's saying. Can she explain to us, no matter how much care is exercised and what change might happen, can she explain to us how areas like mine of real multiple deprivation have so many of the betting shops with the terminals, and other wealthy areas do not. There is an absolute contrast. The case we make is the industry is targeting areas like me. Does she deny that or not?
Well, I hear what the Honourable Lady is saying, but the location of these betting premises and shops is to do with footfall, not deprivation. It's simply a matter of supply and demand. The government is in no doubt that there is scope for the industry to improve its ability to identify people who are potentially at risk and to intervene early to minimise harm. And that's why we demand the industry introduce better player protection measures.
For giving way. Does she, though, accept the point made so forcefully by Mary Portas that the prevalence of betting shops, particularly in deprived areas, is having a very, very damaging effect on retail centres?
Yes, of course, we look carefully at the Portas review, and we did feed into it, and we made the point in our response to the Portas review that Article 4 directions exist and can be used by local authorities, in addition, of course, to local authority licensing conditions, which were used very successfully recently by Newham.
I thank you for giving way. Just to take it back to the question from the Honourable Lady, isn't the real reason that those betting premises are in the Honourable Member opposite's constituency is because of the legislation she probably voted for, which provides that when a local councillor is faced with an application for a premise licence, they'll already have received their operator's licence from the Gambling Commission, and that legislation, with its 3 very strictly limiting objectives, simply does not allow the local councillors in her constituency to actually reject the premise application licence.
Well, I think he makes a very interesting point.
I think I have a great deal of sympathy with what the Honourable Member for Eltham has said, but I think that the Labour Party's motion is cynical and opportunistic given the recent history. Can I ask the Minister specifically? The government's case would be a lot more compelling if it were prepared to look again at the precautionary principle of looking at the £100 a spin game before the empirical demonstrable evidence is published in the autumn, particularly in respect of the impact on vulnerable people.
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that we actually will look at everything. No stone will remain unturned on that matter. On the matter of player protection measures...
The Minister has indicated that she's not at this stage giving way. Honourable members must allow the Minister to continue with her speech and listen to her. Minister.
Well, I think I've been pretty generous so far. I want to make a little bit of progress and then I will take some more interventions. I have been consistently clear that the onus is on the betting industry to immediately develop and implement improved harm mitigation measures and make data available for independent research. I met with the chief executives of the 5 largest UK bookmakers in December, and I've challenged them to develop a plan by the end of January to link players with play in a way that allows us to better understand player behaviour and to assess the effectiveness of harm mitigation measures. This could include much more extensive use of card-based play on gaming machines to track player behaviour more systematically. However, I'm not prepared to delay taking action while we wait to receive research outcomes or industry plans to be developed. And for this reason, I've challenged the industry to press ahead with its social responsibility code and to implement precautionary player protection measures at the earliest possible opportunity.
Minister for giving way. Can the Minister confirm that the research will include player behaviour analysis, which has been opposed by the industry, and indeed they didn't allow the University of Cambridge to take forward this because it's crucial to the understanding of how these machines and the player interact?
Confirm that. These measures include the implementation by March 2014 of suspensions in play when voluntary limits are reached, automatic alerts when customers have been playing for 30 minutes or when a certain amount of money has been spent, enhanced responsible gambling messaging, and a considerably improved and expanded system of voluntary self-exclusion, which makes it much easier for players to exclude from multiple gambling premises. I do not accept the accusation that these measures are unsatisfactory because the code is not mandatory. I have already made it clear that if the industry does not make sufficient progress in implementing these measures or cannot demonstrate to me that they have been effective, the government may act on a precautionary basis anyway. Additionally, the implementation of these measures do not, of course, preclude further action at any point should that become necessary.
Minister giving way. I'm grateful to you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my constituency, I had a major bookmaker who's just retired, so he's more honest than most. And he tells me that it's like cocaine. It's totally and absolutely addictive. And we've got examples of that. A man wins £13,000 in the morning, he's allowed to play till 8 o'clock in the evening and he loses every penny he's won. That's how addictive this is. That's the position that we're in, and it's now polluting our high streets where shops that were there are disappearing and in their place they're getting bookmaker shops. It's just a ridiculous situation and it needs decisions sooner rather than later.
And that's why there's no green light for fixed odds betting terminals. Their future is absolutely unresolved, pending the research that we've already started. The Responsible Gambling Trust is carrying out research which aims to better understand how people behave when playing gaming machines and what helps people to play responsibly. The research is the largest piece of academic research ever undertaken on this issue and will aim to understand patterns of gaming behaviour and identify when there is robust evidence that consumers may be experiencing problems.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. Would she confirm that all of the information that she's asked for from the bookmakers they have provided? And if that isn't the case, could she set out what information it is that she would like from the bookmakers that they haven't provided her with?
My honourable friend makes an important point. We need the data, we need the information from the bookmakers, and that was one of the reasons why I met with the big 5 bookmakers in December. They've indicated that they will provide the data that we need, and just to make sure that they do provide the data, a further meeting has been set up with them for the 30th of January. I met with the Responsible Gambling Trust in December and pressed them also to make progress with the research programme and have emphasised to them the importance of obtaining tangible research outcomes by the autumn of 2014. I'm absolutely clear that the industry must rapidly share data to allow the research aims to be met within the timetable required.
Giving way, and I'm pleased that she's acknowledged the work of the Responsibility in Gambling Trust, which I say is made up of 5 independent members and 5 members from the industry. Will she condemn the attacks made on the Responsibility in Gambling Trust by the Fairer Gambling campaign, who are trying to rubbish any work that comes from the Responsibility in Gambling Trust?
Well, I'm not going to get involved in that type of argument, but I do know that the Responsible Gambling Trust do very good work. They're a reputable organisation, and I'm looking forward to receiving this important piece of work from them later on this year.
Would you also accept that in December the public health survey was released and for the first time looked at this issue? But it did say that among both men and women there was no difference in gambling prevalence by area deprivation once age was accounted for. That was true except for the most deprived IMD quintile, where the people were more likely to participate in bingo. It does go on about further FOBT analysis talking about quintile 4, but in essence the data that the most recent data we had said there was no difference by area.
Yes, I think that is a very interesting and important point, and I believe that piece of work also indicated that problem gambling had actually fallen from just below 1% to just below 0.5%.
Under this government.
However, the government is concerned, notwithstanding the drop in the number of problem gamblers, the government is concerned about any level of problem gambling and will, of course, urge the industry, as we are doing, to make real and proper progress in relation to this matter. Whilst planning is a matter for the Department of Communities and Local Government,
she is arguing that there is a serious problem. She keeps wagging her finger at this side of her house and saying it's our fault. She seems to acknowledge... Listen for a moment. She seems to acknowledge that there is a serious problem. So my question to her is, will her government legislate to address this problem before the next general election?
We believe in doing things properly. I mean, we're waiting for the research. We've put pressure on the industry to produce the data. We've got reports coming out imminently. There's going to be precautionary protections placed by the industry at the end of March, and then we'll do whatever is needed to make sure people are protected. Whilst planning is a matter for the Department of Communities and Local Government, my officials are in regular discussions with the communities and local government colleagues about the issue of betting shop clustering. No, I'm not. I'm going to make some progress now. I think I've been very generous.
You've been very generous.
Changes to the national planning system are not the answer to local problems. Local authorities already have a range of powers available in regard to betting shops. A local planning authority can consult and make an Article 4 direction which removes permitted development rights where the local authority considers it is necessary to protect local amenity or the well-being of an area. Both the London Borough of Southwark and Barking and Dagenham have brought forward Article 4 directions, thus requiring a planning application for any new betting shops. This will enable them to consider the application against their local plan. The betting shop must also comply with its licensing conditions, and where they have breached, the local licensing authority has the power to intervene, including removing the licence to operate. As we've heard, the motion before us calls for local communities to ban gaming machines in their areas. The government agrees that the responsibility for managing high streets should rest with local areas, but the truth is that the local authorities already have powers to control control gambling premises in their local areas. Local authorities have the power to reject an application for a gambling premises licence or to grant one with additional conditions should that be necessary. Further, they have the power to review licences after they've been granted and impose licence conditions after review. Many local authorities have already used these powers to very good effect indeed. For example, in November 2013, the London Borough of Newham, which has already been mentioned this afternoon, imposed conditions on a betting shop over concerns that it had about crime, disorder and underage gambling. The conditions stipulate that a minimum of 2 members of staff must be on duty throughout the whole day. Additionally, the betting shop must carry out an undercover underage test purchase to ensure minors are not gambling, and they have to as well send the results to the council and to the police. The government believes it is right for the industry, in conjunction with local authorities, to agree on the appropriate level of staffing in betting shops, depending upon the circumstances of the local area. Local authorities already have powers to ensure a minimum level of staffing where this is appropriate. The government urges local authorities to fully utilise powers at their disposal to limit the number of betting shops in line with local demand and to apply appropriate licensing conditions where they have cause to tackle issues of problematic gambling in local communities. But adopting this motion would lead, in our opinion, to a patchwork of regulation right across the country, where it is okay for gaming machines to be located in some areas but not in others. I do not believe this is the right way forward. The industry must instead introduce better targeted, more effective player protection for users of gaming machines in all locations. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, player protection is at the heart of the government's approach to fixed odds betting terminals, and I've made very clear to the industry that they must urgently develop targeted player protection measures for those players who are greatest at risk. I do not believe the motion before us today can achieve such an outcome. However, I do not rule out any action that may be necessary to make these machines safer. I'm clear that if the betting industry fails to deliver on their commitment to implement enhanced player protection measures by March of 2014, does not share data for independent research, or if the balance of the evidence suggests precautionary action on stakes and prizes or other measures are required, the government will not hesitate to act.
The original question was on the order paper. Since when an amendment has been proposed as on the order paper? The question is the original words stand part of the question. Stephen Tibbs.
Much, Mr Deputy Speaker. If you cross the Barking Road from East Ham Town Hall to go into East Ham High Street North, there's a Paddy Power on the corner at 387 Barking Road, and then there's a Betfred just round the corner at number 6, 2 more Paddy Powers at 20 High Street North, and then directly opposite that at number 11. At number 56 is a Jennings Bet. Set back in Clements Road, directly opposite number 45, there's a Corals. In the short walk then along the High Street to East Ham Station, there are 2 more Betfreds, another Paddy Power, a Ladbrokes and a William Hill, which was the subject of the Licensing Committee meeting in November that the Minister has referred to. The other side of the station, there are 2 more Paddy Powers and a Ladbrokes. Now, I think that is concentration, and it is certainly about the economic character of the area. It is not simply a question of footfall. All those shops open at 7:30 or 8 in the morning. They stay open until 10 o'clock at night. 7 days a week, and one of them has just asked for permission to open at 11. And one particular question I'd be very grateful for the Minister to answer in winding up is, are the measures she's discussing with the industry going to be taken up by organisations like Paddy Power and Betfred, which account for such a large number of the recently opened shops in our area? I'm
very grateful to my right honourable friend, and it seemed that the Minister wasn't aware that the Local Government Association have said that Article 4 directives aren't sufficient enough to prevent the proliferation of betting shops on the high street. Isn't this precisely why we need to reclassify betting shops out of the A2 classification, so that the situation that my right honourable friend has outlined on his high street will not be able to continue any further?
Absolutely right. That is clearly the view of Conservative local authorities. It's view, as we've heard, of the Mayor of London, and I think it will be a view across the House were that to be tested. But to gauge the level of public opinion when 2 more Paddy Power branches were applied for last year, I held a drop-in surgery in a local community centre in my constituency. One of those who came in was a former Paddy Power manager. He said he saw a very large number of families destroyed, businesses ruined, students who gambled away their student loans, and he told me that spending a day in a Paddy Power shop, you'd meet half a dozen people whose lives had been destroyed by their addictions. Last year, Newham Council refused a licence for 2 new Paddy Power branches. The organisation appealed, impressed by the phalanx of sharp lawyers and, I have to say, sold-out former police officers who appeared. The judge duly nodded the appeal through. The truth is that current planning and licensing powers are hopelessly inadequate, as my honourable friend has just said, and do need to be strengthened in the way the motion says. And the claim in the government's motion the local authorities already have enough powers is simply not the case. I'm glad we give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend, and he's making an excellent speech. On the powers of local authorities, can I draw to his attention and to the House the fact that in my constituency in Bells Hill we have a small main street with seven of these premises. The local council, North Lanarkshire, supported by Bells Hill Community Council, turned the thing down, only to find that the Scottish Government used its powers to overrule them. So how can it be said that local authorities have the power?
My friend is absolutely right, and government planning inspectors in England as well routinely overturn these refusals. The powers are inadequate. In my borough we've got 87 of these shops altogether, 9 new ones I think in 2011, a similar number in 2012. That's why we have the scale of the current problem. In the Paddy Power case in Newham, to underline the point, the judge awarded costs against the council just to punish it and warn any others who might be thinking of challenging this growth, using the powers which the government amendment refers to not to do so. And it's absolutely clear that the powers are not adequate. I was grateful to the Minister for her acknowledging my point about Mary Portas's review, but I think she was saying she agreed with what Mary Portas said. Why then is the government not going to act? And one of the people who came to the drop-in in my constituency was the owner of commercial properties in East Ham High Street. He's got, frankly, a guilty conscience about the fact that he's letting all these properties to betting shops, but he made the point that betting chains will pay far more than anyone else to occupy these units. They are very attractive tenants, and by extracting huge sums from people who frankly cannot afford it, they are making money hand over fist. The law needs to change urgently to deal with the problem. We have, as the Minister said, seen some modest recent success in East Ham. The William Hill branch opposite East Ham Station, which has been a magnet for drunken antisocial behaviour for a very long time. After they allowed a 15-year-old to use their machines, an application was made to revoke the licence. We saw the usual phalanx of lawyers and former police officers, but the upshot was the committee did require the company to make some improvements, including, and I'm I'm very pleased this has been picked up in my honourable friend's motion today, requiring them to have at least 2 members of staff present whenever they are open, instead of just the one who's usually there. And as far as I can see, it's only one in all of the other betting shops in the high street. And I understand that, I will in just a moment, I understand this is the first time that condition has been applied and accepted by a bookmaker, and I hope, as our motion implies, it will be a precedent for elsewhere. Give way to my honourable friend.
You mentioned the staff in the betting office. Is you concerned, like I am, that many of these staff do not actually have very much training on actually dealing with, particularly where you have problem gamblers or people that, despite what the industry said, many of these people are given the job and they start work straight away.
Well, I'm afraid it's quite right. In any case, you're one person on your own in one of these shops. A lot of them are quite big. You're sitting behind a glass screen. What are you supposed to do if there is somebody with a problem in the shop? Anyway, there are fights outside very often, and I was very interested to see what Community has said on behalf of its members who work in betting shops today, supporting the motion that my honourable friend has made. So I very much hope, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the House agrees this very good motion in front of us today.
Well done.
Well, John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome this debate this afternoon, as it does provide an opportunity to bring some light to the subject rather than the large amount of smoke that has obscured it so far. That may be a statement of hope rather than experience to date. It is important to bring a bit of perspective to this. First of all, gambling is a legitimate activity. It is something which brings considerable pleasure to millions of people in this country. It generates a lot of economic activity, it provides employment, and it also provides tax revenue, of course, to the government. Betting shops are not a blight on the high street. They are regulated and controlled environments, they provide local employment, and they actually, in some cases, do provide a social benefit as well. I will give way, but there is very limited time.
He says it raises revenue for the government, but in actual fact the government gets about $3 billion a year revenue. The profit on fixed office betting terminals is about $1.5 billion, and it costs the state $3.6 billion to deal with problem gamblers. Didn't that suggest it's bad economics?
Problem gambling, but it's a myth to suggest that problem gambling is entirely the result of fixed odds betting terminals. There is a problem with problem gambling. There are a small number of people who do suffer from addiction, and of course they need some protection. And it has always been the principle to date that the harder forms of gambling are permitted in the more controlled environments. And to that extent, it is something of an anomaly that B2 machines were allowed by the last government into the high street, whereas there were restrictions on those machines in adult gaming centres and in casinos. And it was ironic, actually, that the last government, of course, also wanted to introduce Category A gaming machines, for which there are no limits on stakes or prizes, through super casinos. And I do think that perhaps those anomalies do need to be addressed. That is why the Select Committee, when we looked at this, recommended allowing up to 20 B2 machines in casinos and some B2 machines into adult gaming centres. Now, the problem of problem gambling does need to be... very quickly,
Would my honourable friend agree with me that it's okay restricting stakes and prizes in betting shops, but then there's nothing to stop those people going back home onto the internet where they can play exactly the same games with unlimited stakes and unlimited prizes?
I do agree with my friend, and I wanted to come on to that because he's absolutely right. The issue of problem gambling, the latest statistics show under the English Health Survey that there is something like 0.5% of the population who might be suffering from problem gambling. That's actually a drop on the figure that we had previously from the gambling prevalence study. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to continue. There is very little time. Now, even though the figure may have fallen, even though it is only a very small number of people, of course I accept that those people still need protection. And that is why the committee looked at various technologies which could help address this issue. Things such as self-exclusion, periods of rest between being able to to play machines, and also the issue of mandatory pre-commitment. These are things which I think that we do need to consider. But before taking these measures, it is important that we actually act on the evidence. And that is why we recommended there did need to be greater research into this issue so we could establish whether or not B2 machines actually do present any greater risk of attracting problem gamblers than other types of machines. And in particular, as my honourable friend has just pointed out, the strongest growth in gambling at the moment is taking place online. And there, the controls against allowing people who have a problem to gamble are far less. It is much more difficult to verify age online. It is much more difficult to self-exclude online. I'm sorry, there is a very strict time limit, and therefore I do want to press on. So it is for that reason that I think that we do need a lot more research. Now, the issue about clustering has been raised, and that was something that we also recognised. Now, the Select Committee recommended, and this was widely misinterpreted, that there should be a degree of flexibility for local authorities. And if it could be shown that a large number of betting shops had opened in order to get around the limit of 4 machines, one possible solution would be to allow local authorities to allow more machines in individual betting shops precisely to stop more shops opening. Now, that degree of flexibility we suggested should be applied in an upward direction and not in a downward direction. Now, I support localism, but the problem with the motion tabled by the opposition is that the honourable gentleman has confirmed that it would not be retrospective and he would not be seeking to close existing betting shops on the high street. It would apply to new shops. Well, firstly, I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman if that's not.
By the honourable gentleman, the licensing powers relating to the machines could be retrospective. They could reduce the number of machines per shop.
But he is not proposing to withdraw, to revoke the existing permissions for shops that exist now on the high street. And therefore that is not likely to make any great difference. What it will do is act as an anti-competitive measure because it will benefit the people who are currently operating on the high street and prevent new entrants coming into the market. And therefore generally I think that that is going to be detrimental to to consumers. But the overall conclusion of the Select Committee was that before we take action in this area, we do need to have much more research. Now, the honourable gentleman, the member for Bradford West, is a member of a Responsibility in Gambling Trust. He has pointed out that a very thorough study is underway. That is due to report in the near future, and therefore the opposition's motion preempts the work which is being done by the Responsibility in Gambling Trust and draws conclusions before we've even seen the result of that research. That seems to me completely the wrong way round, and it is for that reason that, as the Select Committee recommended, I think that the government's motion today is correct, and I certainly do not intend to support the motion tabled by the opposition.
Tom Watson. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and Happy New Year to you. I was extremely heartened to hear the Prime Minister express concern over the prevalence of fixed odds betting terminals for the second time at the dispatch box earlier today, because I think this is an issue that concerns both sides of the House. It's a new technology linked to high-stake gambling. To me, there's a simple remedy, and that's to vanquish these machines from the high street or significantly reduce the stakes from £100 to £2, in effect turning these machines into the old-style arcade fruit machines we probably all remember from childhood. But that approach has not yet found favour, and so I think that the next best solution is the motion we have on offer today. In the time I've got, I've really only got time to focus on one area, which I think is a focus on how we commission, fund and respond to research in public policy terms. And I would just like to caution the Minister, I think it's a little foolhardy to put so much store into the findings of a report that is the output of a complex set of arrangements that make it hard to overcome allegations of too much interest from vested interests. And let me explain what I mean by that. The problem I think the government and this House has is that we're waiting for a study into what harm is being caused to individual players, due in a report later this year by the Responsible Gambling Trust, which is in itself funded by a voluntary levy by the gambling industry and chaired by a former industry executive. Now, the gambling industry should not be seen to have influence on a body that is effectively conducting research into itself. In 2008, I'll take you, if you want to intervene, I'll take you in a minute. In 2008, the Gambling Commission themselves recommended a tripartite structure for research, education and treatment. The Gambling Commission argued that if these were to be funded voluntarily, it was essential that the strategy, fundraising and commissioning were run by separate bodies to avoid a conflict of interest. Otherwise, the industry, as the sole funders, might have influence over what research is commissioned. Yeah.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I understand that the point he's making, because he's quite right. It was very difficult at that time to bring together the various bodies that could fund research, education and treatment, because the problem was the National Health Service doesn't fund research and treatment into problem gambling. And the Responsibility in Gambling Trust was the best deal that could be done at the time. But what I regret, and I hope he will not do it, is the Fairer Gambling campaign attacking the integrity of members of that individual body of research in gambling.
I am going to attack the arrangements for this reason, and I'm not decrying my honourable friend here, because you essentially have a choice, don't you, whether you work within the system to try and improve things, or you go externally and try and influence it. And we've taken a different path on that, but I'm sure our policy goals are the same. But for me, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very powerful case. Does he not agree with me that much of the evidence is very clear, and the anecdotal and experiential evidence is very clear? And this is actually a case of whether or not the government is prepared to take on vested interests or not. And time and time again, when this question is raised, their answer is no, they're not.
I do think there's a timidity when it comes to big lobby gambling, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Look, for me, it's hard not to draw the conclusion that these complex relationships are an attempt to hide the influence of the industry into public policy. And whatever the outcome of today's debate, and whatever action we take on FOBTs in the future, I think the current arrangements by which we commission research are in need of decisive modernisation. The Responsible Gambling Strategy Board was set up and recommended strategic objectives to the commissioning body, which at the time was another acronym called the Responsible Gambling Fund. A body called the Gambling Research, Education and Treatment body, also known popularly as GREAT, took over fundraising, and this was headed by Neil Goulden, who was the CEO of Coral and is now the chair of the Association of British Bookmakers. Subsequently, trustees from the Responsible Gambling Fund resigned as they felt GREAT, the fundraising body, had too much influence over what research was to be commissioned. So that's a concern, and I think it's one that we should all address. The credibility. I can't take another intervention. I'm sorry, I'm going to run out of time. Well, later, I can't. I'm sorry, I've got to do it. Now, let me just say, there's a revolving door policy also, I think, with some of the regulators. There's a guy called Andrew Lyman who now works for William Hill and is a rather truculent tweeter, if I could use that term. He used to work for the Commission when they stressed the importance of separating fundraising and commissioning of research. And now he works for William Hill lobbying against that. So I think there's an inherent conflict of interest in the system we've put in place. And I hope that the Minister, when she responds to this discussion, will be able to answer the question, how can this House have confidence in a report when we can't be confident it's truly independent?
Philip Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I once again refer people to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. In the limited time available, I want to just dispel some myths, and I will start by saying it's always a pleasure to follow the Honourable Gentleman for West Bromwich East, my former sparring partner on the Select Committee. But I should point out that at the time that the Select Committee did its report into gambling, the Honourable Gentleman was a member of the Select Committee. I don't think he turned up to any of the sessions, and perhaps if he was so concerned about this issue, he might have actually turned up and listened to some of the evidence, because he might have actually learned something as a result of it. Of course, I'll give way to him.
I apologise to to my honourable friend, and perhaps for not turning up. There was another vested interest I had a personal interest in at the time, as he knows. But when that debate was going on, I thought to myself, not even the honourable member for Shipley would be dumb enough to ask for more FOBTs in bookies rather than less. I was wrong.
Well, it was if it had actually turned up, he would have known that the report was unanimous of all members, including members of the Labour Party. Now, to dispel some myth, the first myth I want to dispel is there's been an explosion of betting officers and machines. The number of betting officers has actually declined from a peak of 14,750 in the mid-1970s to around 8,700 today, and that figure has been virtually the same for the last 10 years. Also, FOBTs, B2 machines, are also in decline. 4% of adults played them in 2010, according to the Gambling Commission. This figure dropped to 3.4% in 2011-12, again according to the Gambling Commission. And in 2013, all bookmakers reported a decline in the gross win from FOBTs. Even in areas considered to have huge numbers of bookmakers, for example Hackney, they make up around about 2.7% of all retail units in Hackney. And if we take somewhere like Greenwich as an example of what's happened, the number of bookmakers have gone up in Greenwich by 8%, at the same time that the population has increased in Greenwich by 13%. So yes, of course, bookmakers are often in densely populated areas, and some of those happen to be poorer areas too, but the relevant fact is that they are densely populated areas, not poorer areas. And I will give way to him.
I'm grateful to him. There are 12 bookmakers in the short stretch of East Ham High Street between East Ham Town Hall and East Ham Station. There's never been anything like such a large number in that small area before. Something dramatic has changed and needs to be fixed.
The right honourable gentleman says that, but of course many of his constituents work in there, and many of his constituents actually enjoy going in there, because if they didn't enjoy going in there, they wouldn't be open. And yes, more bookmakers have moved onto the high street in recent years, but what they've done, the overall number hasn't gone up. They've moved from the side streets due to lower rents because of the recession, largely caused by the party opposite. And they'll probably move back onto the side streets when the economy recovers and rents go back up on the high streets. And anyway, Mr Deputy Speaker, where are the legions of these retailers wanting to open up on the high street in place of bookmakers? It's not a decision between having Next on the high street or William Hills, or having M&S on the high street or Paddy Power. It's a choice between having Ladbrokes on the high street or a boarded up shop. And I can't give away any more times because I've used up my two allowed. There is a demand test. People ask for a demand test. There is a demand test. It's called a customer demand test, which is the ultimate demand test of all. The second myth is that bookmakers target poorer areas. Now, as it happens, Mr Deputy Speaker, the number of different outlets per square mile in the most deprived areas, there are 2 bookmakers per square mile in the most deprived areas. That compares with 9 pubs and 11 takeaways. So if it is that poorer people are being targeted by bookmakers, what does the party opposite have to say about pubs targeting the poorest people in society, about takeaways targeting the most poorest in society? Where do we hear anything about that? We don't, because this is nothing about targeting the poorest in society. It's about being anti-gambling and anti-bookmaker and being popular. So bookmakers are not targeting poorer areas, and if they cared about that, I mean, this is basically middle-class people being patronising to working-class people, telling them that they know best how they should spend their money. The third myth is that machines are used by the poorest people, and again, that is not true. We've had the health survey in recent months which showed that gambling prevalence was highest in the top quintiles of household income, and actually 6% of people in the highest quintile income play FOBTs compared to 4% in the lowest quintile. The Honourable Member for West Bromwich said he didn't want anything, surveys to be linked to the gambling industry. This is the health survey. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the gambling industry, which makes it clear that richer people are much more likely to play FOBTs than poorer people are. And there are actually only 2 gambling activities in that health survey, Mr Deputy Speaker, where poorer people gambled more than the richest people. That was in scratch cards and bingo. Poorer people spend more on scratch cards and bingo than the richest people, the only 2 forms of gambling. What's the party opposite saying about bingo and scratch cards? Nothing, because they don't think it's popular to say anything about that. So I'm afraid it's crocodile tears. I would love to give way to the honourable gentleman, who's a very good man on these issues, but I'm afraid time doesn't allow me to do so. The fourth myth is that problem gambling is going up. In 2012, in this survey, the health survey, 0.8% of men and 0.2% of women were identified as problem gamblers, according to the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders. That's gone down from 0.9% in the last prevalence study. So problem gambling is going down, not up. If B2s and FOBTs were the cause of so much problem gambling, then presumably problem gambling would have gone through the roof over recent years, when actually it's gone down. I also just want to make the point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we often hear about this phrase, the crack cocaine of gambling. The FOBTs are called that. Who by is the question that I would want to ask, not by anybody impartial. The actual first recorded reference came from Donald Trump describing video keno games in New Jersey as the crack cocaine of gambling, because he feared they would keep people out of his casinos. This is a ridiculous debate on a ridiculous premise, and I cannot support, possibly, the opposition motion today.
Mark Hendry.
Mr Deputy Speaker, many of us on both sides of this House represent poor and working class constituents, can see the effect that these machines are having on lives and on families, and the impact on our inner towns and cities, especially where there is a proliferation of betting shops and more opportunities to play these machines, and indeed looking at both category B1 and B2 machines in the clubs as well. Any Labour members who attend trades and labour clubs, and any government members from the government side that have attend political clubs and sports clubs will regularly see people pouring literally hundreds of pounds into these machines, but very often getting very little back from them. Yeah, good point.
I'd like to thank my own friend for giving way. And contrary to what the member for Shipley has just said, would you agree with me that is it merely coincidence that the top 50 unemployed black spots profit from FOBTs to £173 million last year, whilst the 50 lowest unemployment rate areas, the bookies only made £44 million? Doesn't that illustrate the point that he's making?
Well, it does, and I commend what my honourable friend has said, in that it disproportionately affects those who live in poorer working class areas, and that's the point which I think needs making very, very heavily. And one of the problems is that the problem is so pervasive. And again, I referred not just to the B2 machines, but the B1 machines as well. If somebody in a club is drinking too much and clearly has an addiction or a particular problem with drinking, they're very often asked to leave. And if they become a problem customer, are shown the door. However, if somebody is a problem gambler and is pouring money into a machine, they are not warned about their gambling or being excessive. In fact, they are encouraged about such means by such means as placing the machine next to the bar. This is done particularly so that any change put across the bar is put into the machine as quickly as possible. Additionally, a person may be drinking at the bar, and having a machine next to the bar means that there is a comfortable place to park a drink while using that machine. The companies that provide gaming machines to clubs, pubs and bookmakers use all sorts of techniques to maximise profits from those machines. The Gambling Commission does not licence pubs, clubs, working men's clubs or family entertainment centres operating under a local authority permit. So the government claims that they do not collect data for those businesses. But that is the government's explanation for not having sufficient data to deal with what is obviously a problem. The fact that such premises do not collect data for those businesses does not necessarily mean that the government cannot publish a report or carry out an inquiry to get such information. If society has a problem with gambling, it's the government's job to get to the bottom of it, not just to pass enabling legislation to make limits even higher. FOBT machines allow almost unlimited winnings as well as huge losses. Given the technology that the multi-billion-pound gambling industry is using in this day and age, it beggars belief that it cannot collate the information that will allow the government to make informed decisions about what limits should be and about how machines should operate, where they should operate and at what times of the day. If anything, I believe that there is a deliberate attempt by the industry to cover up what is happening. The impact assessment does not give us a true overall picture of the situation. Communities are becoming poorer. We have heard from the government about an increase in employment. But there has been a large increase in part-time employment, and low pay is the problem it always was. and poor people are being drawn initially to try and make money for essentials rather than just coming along for amusement, and then get drawn into the habitual gambling that all of us are seeing on our high streets. People know what is happening with high-stake fixed odds machines. The government knows what is happening, but they have deliberately chosen not to take action and to kick this into the long grass. They are in fact helping the industry by increasing the limits the way that they have. We know what is happening with Wonga and payday loans. We know what austerity is doing to poor people and unemployed people and people on low incomes. People are trying to get money from any source, and gambling seems like a quick fix. It's much more prevalent than it used to be. I've seen in my own town of Preston a huge increase in the number of betting shops and bookies. Payday loan businesses are taking over premises that were once shops, and reputable companies and businesses as well. I'll give way.
I thank my old friend for giving way, and then he talks about the accumulation of data, etc., what the government are now saying that they wish to look at before they make any judgment on this. And he's already identified that practically the data that we're seeing every day with our own eyes is telling us the truth, that these are increasing day upon day in our high streets.
Well, that's right. It doesn't take a genius to see what's going on. We're all seeing it every day in our own streets with our own eyes. And I think poor and unemployed people who have been hit by austerity measures are being drawn to the clubs and bookies to use these machines on a scale that's never been seen before. The current limit of 4 FOBT machines should remain the limit, and local authorities should be given the powers that are outlined in our opposition motion. Ask members to support our opposition motion.
Dr. Therese Coffey.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a great pleasure to contribute to this debate. I was on the Select Committee when we investigated this between 2011 and 2012, and I think it was a very useful inquiry to do several years after the Gambling Act. Because, as has already been said, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but I think one of the roles of select committees, indeed legislators as a whole, is to step back and ensure that we are looking at the real data as opposed to perhaps other people's interpretations of it. If we do a little bit of a history lesson, as has already been alluded to, FOBT machines entered into the high street bookmaker shops in the early 2000s, and it was then restricted after a code of conduct that was agreed with the industry to restrict the game type solely to roulette, to cap the stakes and prizes, and to have minimum time intervals between bets, as indeed the number of machines per shop. And I think that was a useful compromise, but the whole point of doing a review of legislation is to see, well, are there unintended consequences? And one of the most obvious unintended consequences has been alluded to by, or referred to by many members here today, that these machines are popular, that there is a demand for them, and as a consequence, what we're seeing in high streets in different parts of the country is that more and more betting shops are appearing. Now, some of that may be due to the fact that premises are readily available with the mergers of various banks and building societies, and then being in the same planning class. But ultimately, these shops would not open if people did not want to use them.
Yeah. Well, will she give way?
I'll give way to you first.
I'm very grateful for giving way. Is she disappointed, as I am, that there's been no mention from the government benches of the survey done in Newham of 500 customers who've walked out of betting premises by the 2CV, a reputable data gathering company, that shows an incredible that 62% of people, when she says that folk go into these premises and that they are addicted to them, 62% admit to spending every single last penny in their pocket and only leaving when it's all been spent.
Well, I think I have seen that survey, and I think it was commissioned by the Campaign for Fairer Gambling. But I don't deny the fact that that was the outcome. But Professor Orford, when he gave evidence to our committee, somebody who's known to be generally anti-gambling, said, we have the most studied country in the world. And with 3 public prevalence surveys since the year 2000, the public health, doing more research now, even in spite of all that, our committee was not able to substantially be able to correlate the addiction to gambling as being particularly driven by FOBT as opposed to other forms of gambling. I'll give way on that point.
I'm very grateful. Is my honourable friend aware that in the last last year in the South East, something like 160 machines, even in the current regime, 160 machines or so, illegal machines were confiscated. And would you agree with me that if FOBTs were banned in the way that the party opposite would like to see, all it would do is drive it underground and we'd have even more of these machines being played illegally?
Well, I agree with the point that if you displace an activity in a controlled environment, there is the risk of going to an uncontrolled environment, and I recognise that. I think also some of the briefing we've had indicates that the Gambling Commission itself saying you cannot use the gambling prevalence survey results to specifically identify the causation of problem gambling. Some of the research alluded to, secondary data research said virtual gaming machines have strong association with gambling-related problems, but few people endorse that they have played these games during the past 12 months. These findings suggest that popular perceptions of risk associated with specific types of gambling for the development of gambling-related problems might misrepresent actual risk. And furthermore, the range of gambling involvement frequently is a better predictor of disordered gambling status than type of gambling. This finding is important because it represents a deviation from the tendency to focus on specific games, such as fruit slot machines, as central to gambling-related problems, and instead we should be looking more at global behaviour characteristics. This is indeed the research that was referred to by the Campaign for Fair Gambling, but I don't think it actually stacks up their own particular view. Now, in terms of whether about poor people are being targeted, there are different surveys out there at the moment, the data from Public Health England, but if I go back to the BGPS 2010, table 3.9, in terms it specifically sets out FOBT, and in terms of the participation in gambling activities in the past year by IMD, there is no particular difference between the classes. Indeed, it's Scotland that has the highest prevalence of FOBT usage in the country as a whole. I think one of the points that I really want to try and get across is that I don't deny that there are individual cases. We know that there are problem gamblers. The latest estimate is it's between 300,000 to 400,000. And those individual cases will be absolute tragedies. We've all heard them on the radio. We'll have met perhaps people in our surgeries where they have gone and bet the family silver, where families are torn apart by this. But I put it to honourable members that this is no different from people who are driven to similar distraction by other addictions that they may have developed, whether that's in alcohol or indeed other drugs and similar. And I think it's important that I respect the honourable gentleman from the honourable member for Eltham, and he's saying, well, this is just about giving a few more powers. I think one of the things that generally the basis of our English law is that you can do what you want unless the government and the law intervenes to restrict it, and we see that with crime and planning and so on. And I think we have to be careful when we just simply start stopping legitimate gambling, which is a legitimate activity, because of our anecdotal research that we see. A bit like many campaigns that members of Parliament will receive, we tend to hear from less than 1% of our constituency, and we can't assume that everybody believes that way. I've only got 45 seconds left, I'm afraid. So I think that we need to think carefully about any changes that we propose to make. I did support the government's, the Select Committee's report, where we need to take a measured approach to this. We do need to continue to work to try and tackle the problems of problem gamblers, but that doesn't mean that we should be throwing away the freedoms that people rightly enjoy, whether it's in our high streets or whether it's elsewhere when they enjoy gambling. Mr Deputy Speaker, I cannot support the opposition motion as it stands today. I think the government's amendment provides a reasoned approach to ensuring that we continue to tackle this, and with that I'll be supporting the government.
Louise Elman.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The key issue at the heart of the debate that's now taking place is the issue of localism. And that's the ability of local authorities to act in the interests of the people they represent. I was most surprised when the Minister referred to localism as an unacceptable patchwork. I think that's a very surprising and really unacceptable approach to take when we're looking at local authorities and their responsibilities. And this issue is not about gambling in general. It's about very specific and growing concerns about fixed odd betting terminals in betting shops, where gambling can take place £100 every 20 seconds, and the results of that can often be very disastrous for individual people, and research has shown that people using these facilities are particularly young men who are unemployed. There is certainly a link between Yes, and give way.
Lady, has she ever played a fixed odds betting terminal? Because it has one of the highest rates of return of any gambling machine, and it is virtually impossible to lose hundreds of pounds, since the majority of the money you put in, you get back out again.
I am concerned about the negative aspects of this activity, and I refer to some of the information contained in the report of Landman Economics, which I have quoted from. There certainly is a link between the growth of these facilities and areas of deprivation. In Liverpool Riverside, which I represent, there are now 189 such terminals, one of the highest levels in the country, and that is a very deprived area. This deprivation has been recognised and indeed caused great concern to the local authorities of Liverpool City Council. And that is why the City Council raised this issue last November, and called for increased powers to enable them to deal with this very specific concern. Because it is often local authorities who can recognise the cumulative effects of these facilities in betting shops, the impact on local communities and the impact on individuals. And there have been many cases quoted by the City Council in their debates of people turning to loan sharks in desperation, having got into debt because of these facilities and the problems that they have incurred. Indeed, if I can refer again to the Landman Economics report, there is evidence there of the impact on local communities in an economic sense as well. And in fact, information that an increase in spending of £1 billion on these terminals rather than on other services can lose the equivalent of 13,000 UK jobs. So there is a concern about the development of these facilities, the uncontrolled development in terms of areas of deprivation, in terms of the impact on individuals and on the impact of local communities. And it is important that local authorities are given necessary powers to deal with this issue. And the members, the government members, seem to have said a number of very different things about local authority powers. Some honourable members have indicated that local government has sufficient powers. Others have said that maybe those powers are difficult to find. And others have quoted examples of where those powers have been found failing or simply do not exist. The key issue is that local authorities should be able to deal with the issues that they consider to be important to their areas. This does not mean that they are forced to take a particular course of action, but it enables them to do it when they feel that it is necessary. It is not about gambling in general, and this certainly would not deal with the very significant growth of online gambling. This is another issue. It is a very specific issue. This is extremely important that local government is given the powers it requests to react to problems.
I think he's making a very powerful point about the contradictions on the benches opposite between localism and nationalism, and she's making a very powerful point about addiction. I think the 2CV survey of 500 punters in Newham said that 87% of those said that these machines were very addictive, and as I've said earlier, 62% said they'd put every last penny into these machines before they left the shops. Is it not shocking?
My honourable friend makes very important points, and I urge the government members to recognise that the heart of the motion we are debating is about empowering local authorities to take acts that they consider necessary in the interest of the people they represent. It does not preclude other decisions being taken when further research has been carried out, and I would urge the government to support this motion.
Stuart Jackson. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Just before Christmas, I was one of only 4 government honourable members to vote against the government on the deferred division on this issue, but unfortunately, although I have a great sympathy with many of the points that the honourable gentleman for Elton, the Shadow Minister, has made, I cannot tonight support the Labour Party motion. I won't rehearse the reasons, but it is cynical and opportunistic, and not least it's confused, because remember, the Leader of the Opposition launched a campaign in the summer which was about stakes, it was about problem gambling, it was about the generic issue, it wasn't just about use class orders and planning, which is what the honourable gentleman is telling the House today. But I'm also in a position to say that I have been partly reassured by the approach of the Minister, the Honourable Lady for Maidstone and the Weald. Undoubtedly, I give way to my honourable friend.
I've simply been assured by the Minister's response, because he'll share my concern in that he'll talk about the clustering in Peterborough, but similarly in Green Lanes, in my constituency, there's particularly been clustering around bedding shops, and there is a concern that there should be greater local powers. Now, my local area wants to set up a neighbourhood plan that involves the local high street. Does he expect that in the review and the response that no stone being unturned means a stone which includes the greater powers in relation to planning and licensing?
Absolutely, and I think that's integral to any remedial powers that the government takes to deal with the very serious and legitimate concerns of many of my constituents. I have 22 betting shops in the central area of Peterborough with 81 FOBTs, generating about £3.2 million. I'm disappointed too, because this could have been a genuine cross-party debate around the information and research done by bodies such as the Methodist Church, which hasn't always been supportive of my party, and the Salvation Army. And I declare an interest as a member of the Good Neighbours Board of the Peterborough Citadel of the Salvation Army. But it isn't, and unfortunately now it's been, from the Labour Party's point of view, rather confused. But undoubtedly I think there is a problem. Remember, the precautionary principle is not saying that there should be unambiguous, completely definable evidence of causal links between critical problem gambling and FOBTs. It wasn't about that. It was about the risk of there being problem gambling. And I think one of my concerns, which has been partly ameliorated today, is the precautionary principle around the maximum stake was a worry, in that I was concerned about whether the research being undertaken about the impact of those £100 spin games on the most vulnerable people in our constituency would be undertaken by independent individuals. And I understand the Honourable Member for Bradford South is defending the Responsible Gambling Trust, and he's right to do so as a member, as I understand. And I don't distrust them, but I do think there are very, very serious concerns. And I'm always happy to give way to my honourable friend.
Well, I'm very grateful, but he talks about the precautionary principle about gambling and problem gambling. That's an argument for ban gambling altogether, because whenever you have any form of gambling, there will be some people who are addicted to it. So his argument is to ban gambling altogether on that logic. And is he aware that you can have a bet on a 5-furlong sprint to Epsom, which takes 50 seconds, and have an unlimited amount of money on it? There's no limit whatsoever.
Well, it's interesting that my honourable friend for Shipley, for whom I have an enormous amount of respect, I think he's wrong on this issue, he touches on the impact, the cumulative impact, the displacement impact, for instance, on, I can't give way, I'm afraid, on horse racing betting, on football betting, and on greyhound betting. No, I can't give way. I know the honourable member for Hindburn is very engaging, but I have to pass on his blandishments on this occasion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am not a devil take the hindmost free market libertarian. I'm a conservative, and I'm a social conservative. And I believe that there is a compact, a bond of trust with the most vulnerable people in our society. Because actually there is a problem with problem gambling. As a Christian, I am compassionate for those people who are stuck in the mindset of feeling that they have to gamble. My concern, mostly though, is for their children and families. Those families affected by problem gambling. And we have a responsibility in the duty. We have a regulatory regime for many things that we do in society, and I think that we're wrong when so much money is being made on stakes and on money going in from some of the poorest people in society to walk on by and say that this is something that we shouldn't look at again. And I have to say the Labour Party were catastrophically wrong on this issue, and strategically I think that this is the worst example of an opposition motion that they've ever chosen, because this is very, very weak ground for them to be on. So I believe that the Minister is right to look at the precautionary principle, right to demand all the up-to-date sophisticated data from these machines, which are very sophisticated, these B2 machines, from the gambling companies. A code of practice is not good enough. You know, we're not talking about Mother Teresa, we're talking about pretty ruthless business organisations that are protecting their interest, and some of them are preying on the most vulnerable people in society. We need the information, and I agree with my honourable friend for Suffolk Coastal. We need to base information on data, data that can be proved, data that can be tested, not on anecdote, and I accept that as the case. I do believe, having said all that, that the Salvation Army have produced a great deal of data. My honourable friend mentioned earlier about the number of problem gamblers that has gone up in the last few years. 23% of the money spent on FOBT machines was spent by people with gambling problems. According to Dr. Henrietta Bowden-Jones, lead consultant at the NHS National Problem Gambling Clinic, 50% of the clinic's patients reported FOBTs as particularly problematic. In short, Mr Deputy Speaker, we are a government committed to localism. Let's give local authorities more powers to look at use class orders, to crack down on clustering, to look at the absolute number of FOBT machines. And I agree with that. But let's have a consensus across the House, not party-petty, political, vindictive point scoring. That's not what we want. This is too important an issue for our families and communities for that.
Judy Elliott.
If you step off the train and walk out of Sunderland Station, you'll see straight away a betting shop, and you don't need to walk very far to see several more. According to the Campaign for Fairer Gambling, in 2012 there were 30 betting shops in Sunderland Central with 109 fixed odds betting terminals, with gross gambled amounts of nearly £120 million, the second highest in the North East. These machines have been referred to as the crack cocaine of gambling so often. That's easy to become blasé about their effects. But the reason they are referred to in such terms is because of their relentless speed and high stakes can be devastating. Problem gambling is associated with a number of mental and physical health issues, including depression and insomnia, in addition to comorbid disorders such as alcohol abuse. Problem gambling is a significant health issue, both from a public and private perspective. Whilst treatment is needed and sought by many, prevention of extreme gambling behaviours should be boosted by giving local authorities the power to restrict the number of betting shops opening in their areas and revoke or reduce the number of fixed odds betting terminals in each branch. FOBTs are purposefully, cynically targeted at the most vulnerable in our society. They target areas of deprivation and take money away from those who can least afford it. In an article this morning, Dick Venix, Chief Executive of the Association of British Bookmakers, claimed that misinformation was being spread on this issue, citing the 2012 Health Survey for England. Yet that same study shows that nearly twice as many people in the most deprived quintile used fixed odds betting terminals than those in the least deprived. It drags vulnerable people into cycles of debt, exacerbates our cost of living crisis and turns other shoppers away from our already struggling high streets. GamCare, which provides support and advice to anyone suffering from a gambling problem, has shown that 40% of calls to their helpline named FOBTs as their main problem. There is a clear link between problem gambling and debt problems. Research from GamCare and the Money Advice Trust revealed that debts of up to £60,000 might be common amongst problem gamblers. It also stated that there is an urgent need to improve education about gambling for young people in schools. Education is crucial, but often it's all too late. Problem gambling, encouraged by FOBTs, doesn't just affect adults, but an estimated 60,000 young people aged between 12 and 15. Furthermore, young people are far less likely to seek help for their gambling problems. The industry is stoking fears that any changes to FOBTs will inevitably lead to job losses. Yet currently there is an inversely proportional relationship between the net takings of FOBTs and the number of employees in betting shops, as many branches are single-staffed. It can be difficult to monitor users and detect problem gamblers, and even harder if the industry has its way and has the number of machines in each shop actually increased. Betting shop clusters do far more harm than just to gamblers. The Porter's review said, the influx of betting shops, often in more deprived areas, is blighting our high streets, and it puts many people off going and shopping in our high streets. FOBTs are bad for problem gamblers, bad for our high streets and bad for public health. I very much hope that the government promise of localism, greater local decision making and planning will count for something today, and that they join us to put local communities before profits of betting shops.
Dame Angela Watkins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I rise to speak in support of the amendment in the name of the Prime Minister, which sets out a sensible and measured approach to any future changes to policy on fixed odd betting terminals or local authority powers in licensing and planning. It will be based on research into the effect of these terminals on the 1% of gamblers identified as problem gamblers. When I visited a local betting shop in a high street in my constituency, it was a rather quiet, low-key activity, unexpectedly. I certainly didn't recognise the picture painted by the Honourable Member for East Ham, where he said that betting shops had attracted drunkenness and bad behaviour. Gambling is as legitimate a leisure activity as going to football matches, pubs or the cinema. It is, yes, by all means.
Grateful to her. I wonder if she's aware as well that it's well established that the staff of betting shops are instructed not to report violent incidents inside the shops in order to keep them out of the crime statistics. Yep.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention, and I can only say how strongly it contrasts with my own experience in visiting a local betting shop in Hornchurch. Gambling is enjoyed by 8 million people nationally, and the local shops provide jobs and help to stimulate the economy. People have the right to choose how they spend their disposable income. I have no gambling instinct personally. I choose not to gamble. That choice is open to everyone. And I defend the right of others to gamble responsibility if that is their choice.
Will the Honourable Friend give way? I thank the Honourable Friend to make a very good speech. One of the key points here is in the fixed premises on the high streets you cannot drink alcohol. If we were to go down this line and push more people onto online gambling, who knows what will happen as people can sit and drink and gamble at a very quick speed.
Well, my Honourable Friend makes a very good point, and I have to say the betting shop that I visited was more like a coffee shop because tea and coffee was being served. And I do question the claims that betting shops are too numerous or not wanted, because clearly some local people do want them, otherwise they wouldn't remain viable. Now, passers-by were not being dragged in off the street. In fact, most people passed by. And nobody inside the shop was being coerced into betting against their will or to spending more money than they'd planned. The well-trained staff knew most of their local customers, their regular customers, and were trained to notice any addictive behaviour should it occur. Help and advice was available to any individual who needed or wanted it. There is a consensus in Parliament and with the gambling industry that help should be available to the 1% who are unable to gamble responsibly. And they become addicted. We're right to be concerned about problem gambling, but we should seek ways to deal with it without spoiling the legitimate enjoyment of the 99% of responsible gamblers. The Association of British Bookmakers is bringing forward new measures as part of its Code for Responsible Gambling and Player Protection. This includes allowing member players to limit their spending and for the time for which they play. Mandatory alerts will tell customers when they have played for 30 minutes or spent £250. Staff will also be alerted. The industry also raises nearly £6 million each year voluntarily for research, education and treatment for problem gamblers. The opposition motion includes the claim that it is alarmed that people can stake as much as £100 every 20 seconds on these machines. This really does over-egg the pudding by making the motion cynical and gimmicky. The Association of British Bookmakers states that it is impossible to credit a machine that quickly. There's more chance of winning the National Lottery for 3 consecutive weeks than losing £18,000 in 1 hour on a gaming machine. Data shows that most people play for an average of 15 to 20 minutes and spend about £11 an hour. It's very important that accurate evidence is gathered on the effect of fixed-odd betting terminals on the 1% of problem gamblers, on the range of measures being undertaken by the gambling industry to prevent, identify and treat problem gamblers, and whether the powers of local authorities, as planning and licensing authorities, are appropriate and effective. Any changes must also have regard to the 90% of responsible gamblers and the important contribution made by betting shops to local jobs, their important contribution to the local and national economy in terms of 45,000 jobs and £1 billion in tax revenue. For these reasons, I support the amendment.
Jerry Sutley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to refer the House to my declaration in the Register of Members' Interest, and I am a non-paid independent trustee of the Responsibility in Gambling Trust. Now, the trust was set up as a result of the last Labour government, who wanted the gambling industry to contribute to a voluntary levy toward research, education and treatment. And as the honourable member has just said, nearly £6 million has been raised towards that end. The trustees are made up of 5 independent trustees and 5 industry trustees under the chairmanship of Neil Goulden. And I wanted to intervene on my honourable friend, the member for West Bromwich East, who was not in his place, perhaps that's not unusual, to the point that Neil Goulden is not the chairman of the ABB. The Trust's Commission's work to be carried out to look at the core issues affecting problem gambling and indeed the treatment of problem gamblers. And it has an excellent Chief Executive in Mark Etches, who has considerable experience across the piece. Mr Deputy Speaker, I raise the work of the Trust because the idea that this industry is unaware of its responsibilities to problem gambling is unjustified. The Trust has commissioned detailed independent research into the issue of FOBTs and related matters. And the subcommittee, which is very important, dealing with the research and findings, is chaired by a senior independent trustee, Liz Barclay, who is a respected broadcast journalist and producer. And it's been made clear to the industry that whatever the research throws up in terms of recommendations, the Trust will stand by those recommendations. An interim report is expected in March, with a full report following later. Now, Mr Speaker, today's debate is important because there are continuing concerns about FOBTs, particularly from the Local Government Association and its members, as well as parliamentary colleagues, and usually those concerns are connected with the proliferation or perceived proliferation of betting shops. Mr Deputy Speaker, the betting industry employs 40,000 people directly, and there are 8,773 betting shops in Britain, which is far less than the 16,500 betting shops that existed in the 1970s. We'll give way.
Well, and he's making an excellent speech as usual. Would he also confirm that around a third of those betting shops make about £15,000 a year or less in profit, and that half of those are actually independent family-run businesses, which is what I was brought up in, a family-run betting shop, not big corporate companies as the party opposite would like to portray?
I accept the point from the honourable gentleman that there are many independent betting shops, but I think the problem is the perceived proliferation, as he pointed out in his speech, of the main bookmakers being on the high street. And as he said, the reason why they're on the high street is that they were on the side streets, they now moved to the high streets. And I think the problem for those gambling companies is they're associated with the payday loan companies, they're associated with all that's on the high street at the moment, which is causing great concern, particularly amongst our local government colleagues. And that's why I have no problem with the resolution before us in terms of the issues around local government and local government powers. I think those powers exist already in terms of the licensing objectives of the Gambling Act, and that many local authorities could use that if they felt that betting shops were acting outside the licensing objectives. So I think it's understandable that local authorities want to have more powers. And as the Minister said, FOBTs have always been under probation. The deal that was done under the Gambling Act restricted it to 4, and I do think that we need to reflect on that. But I think we have to have evidence, and the evidence, I think, will be forthcoming through the Responsibility in Gambling Trust, who have asked the bookmakers to provide us with a whole range of information. And to counter the point from my honourable friend from West Bromwich East, the issue is that the independent directors will be looking at the report and the recommendation and making a report to the full trustees. As the chair of the Select Committee said, we looked at it as a Select Committee and determined that the number of machines and the number of betting shops should be a local level decision by local authorities. The problem I have, Mr Deputy Speaker, is with the antics of the Fairer Gambling campaign. Now, it's right and proper that the campaign sets out its view, but it's not right that it tries to vilify those who oppose their views. And it sets out to rubbish any analysis that is not its own and in particular trying to rubbish the work of the RIGT that was set up, as I said, to look at the issues of problem gambling. If this is a real campaign on fairer gambling, then why are the FOBTs its only focus? There are many other areas of problem gambling, as the gambling prevalence study has shown. We have, for instance, the issue of the national lottery being increased from £1 to £2, people being able to buy a lottery ticket at 16 and not being able to go into betting shops at 18. And there are many other issues, and the issue of online gambling has been talked about before. I believe that this didn't need to be an emotive debate this afternoon. I think we could get to the core of what the issues are. The point about local authorities having more power, I think, has been well made by my honourable friend to my right. But I do believe that we need to look at this in a sensible way, wait for the research to come forward, and then make decisions based on that evidence.
Lynch.
Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak in this debate this afternoon, but first I'd like to add my tribute to my parliamentary neighbour Paul Goggins. You can't say this about many politicians, but I've never heard a bad word said about Paul on either side of the House. He was a very courteous minister and treated ministers with respect in opposition. He'll be sorely missed by all sides of the House, and my thoughts go to his family and close friends at this difficult time. Turning to the motion, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's more interesting to see what is not in it rather than what is. Since it's an opposition day motion with a vote that makes no difference to government policy, we've come to expect from the party opposite a long line of motions on areas of disagreement between the two coalition parties. And so I was fully expecting to see yet another motion from the opposition that matched Liberal Democrat policy. In other words, a commitment to reducing stakes and prizes and plans for a separate use class for betting shops to give more powers to local authorities to restrict the number of licensed betting shops on our high streets and in our local centres. Back in September last year, the Liberal Democrats called for more betting shops, to be put in a new separate planning use class, allowing local authority planning committees to control their number. And just 3 months later, Labour announced that they would legislate to put betting shops in a separate use class, so that councils can use planning powers to control the numbers opening in their area. It's good to see that they're following our lead. Some, including the Honourable Member for West Bromwich East, have also claimed that the government has missed an opportunity to proceed with a reduction in stakes and prizes on fixed odds betting terminals. Excuse me. And so I was rather surprised to see that the motion failed to address the fundamental problem of being able to stake £100 a spin and instead simply focusing on slowing down the rate of spin. Even if this was slowed to the pace of a normal roulette table at 50 spins an hour, this would mean that someone could still lose to up to £5,000 in the space of an hour, rather than the current £18,000. On these benches, we won't be lectured on fixed odd betting machines by Labour. Labour's cultural legacy to our high streets and town centres after 13 years in government has been 24-hour drinking, lap dancing and fixed odds betting terminals. It was Labour who allowed the introduction of these highly damaging and addictive gaming machines that have wreaked so much damage to people's lives in the face of Liberal Democrat warnings at the time. Obviously, we're delighted that Labour have finally woken up to the damage that their policies have caused on deprived high streets up and down the country, and that they now...
Well, I'm very grateful. He says he won't be lectured by the Labour Party on these issues, but will he be lectured by Derek Webb, who is the sort of unite of the Liberal Democrats, who I believe has given £150,000 in donations to the Lib Dems over the last year and heads the campaign for fairer gambling? Could he perhaps set out what Derek Webb's background is and where he got all of his money from?
I thank the Honourable Member for that helpful intervention, but I don't think I'll take any lectures off anyone on either side of the House about political donations. To be fair to the party opposite, some of their members have accepted that they made a mistake on FOBTs. In fact, the Shadow Secretary of State herself has admitted that Labour has made a mistake. But their motion fails to address the problem of £100 a spin stakes that are still allowed to appear on our high streets. Therefore, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to reject Labour's motion this afternoon on the basis that it would not solve the problems created by FOBT machines, but also because the timing of the debate is ill-judged when the coalition government is currently undergoing research into the impact of FOBTs. The government has challenged the betting industry to implement enhanced player protection measures by March of this year or face precautionary measures. If the industry fails to deliver on its commitments, or if at any time the balance of evidence suggests action is required, the government must not hesitate from making a precautionary reduction in stakes and prizes. It's no secret that there is disagreement between the coalition parties. Liberal Democrats believe that there is clear evidence of harm created by FOBTs, and I'm confident that the research will prove the need for action. Last year's GamCare figures show that 39% of calls to its helpline came from people who cited B2 machines specifically. The Salvation Army estimated there's been an increase of 30,000 people with a problem between 2007 and 2010. Research conducted by Professor Gerda Reif at the University of Glasgow suggests that B2s pose a particular risk for problem gamblers because of their rapid rate of play, which offers addicts the quick fix they're looking for. And a 2011 study in the European Journal of Public Health found that virtual gaming machines had the strongest association with gambling-related problems out of all the activities studied, which included horse racing betting, football betting, the lottery, online gambling, casino...
Order! I'm going to have to drop it to 3 minutes to try and get people in. If we can have less interventions, it might be helpful to get as many members in as possible. I'm now going to take Chris Evans.
Deputy Speaker, I refer the House to my entry in the register of members' interests. In debates of this nature, we are in danger of dividing gambling into good and bad gambling companies. Betting shops are seen as bad, while the National Lottery, which is not even being mentioned in this debate, is seen as good. There can be no doubt that the potential for gambling addiction is high in the case of FOBTs. However, there is a tendency to blame betting shops for everything. There has been no talk of the presence of FOBTs in pubs, motorway service stations. Indeed, when I drive up and down the M4 on a Monday and back on a Thursday, I walk into a service station and I think in some tiny corner I'm in the middle of a mini casino. And who's policing them? Equally, there is no mention of the dominant position of the National Lottery. News agents up and down the land have a lottery terminal and scratch cards can be bought anywhere. They are far more accessible and far more addictive than FOBTs. The point I am making is we have to seriously look at FOBTs and gaming machines. I think we not only have to work with the betting industry, but the pub industry and the owners of motorway service stations, amusement arcades, and yes, Camelot. What we need, if we are to legislate properly in this area, is a strong academic survey of the impact of prolonged use and the clientele who use these machines. It's easy to bash these machines and bash the industry, and the anecdotal evidence is all very well, but what we would like to see is facts and figures before we intervene in this area. Since gaming machines were implemented in 2002, there's been no significant change in the levels of problem gambling. This is not me saying that, but a study commissioned by the Gambling Commission in 2010. The same study also indicated that problem gamblers played up to 9 different products. They're not standard FOBT machines feeding in note after note. They're looking for other outlets for their addiction. A problem gambler is betting on horses and on the dogs, in addition to using the machines, as well as scratch cards. And I have not heard one evidence, anybody talk how many people are addicted to scratch cards when they can walk into the newsagents and just buy one. I do not think any member of this House would disagree that our aim should be to protect the customer. But my concern is by not debating this issue properly, we are not dealing with problem gamblers. And in the short space of time that I only have 30 seconds left, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think we also need to talk about single staffing, and Community provided a briefing on it today. It was a problem when I was in the betting shop, that I was the cashier and the manager. Now, it was all very well saying we didn't have the footfall, only 20 people walked through the door, but 20 people could have been looking to put bets on at the same time. It was putting me under stress. I didn't have to deal with FOBTs then, but it also stopped members of staff from policing FOBTs even now. And also, from a social issue, I was only being paid to be the manager that day. I wasn't being paid for the cashier. So it was actually below the minimum wage. If that is still going on, it needs to be addressed. I'm sorry I wish I had more time, but I will give away.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, pleasure to follow the member for doing his thoughtful, careful speech on this sensitive subject. The government's approach has been set out as being one based on needing firm evidence for any change in gambling laws to be made. I think that's absolutely the right approach, and I believe When I served on the Select Committee, the gambling inquiry that we held showed this is an incredibly complex area with a lot of contradictory evidence. We've had a number of members assert during this debate that there is an uncontrollable, unsustainable boom in the use of gambling, and a study of the actual facts simply does not support that. Yes, there was an increase in the use of FOBTs after the Gambling Act came in, but actually their number on the high street has declined in the last 3 years. Betting shops are changing location, but there's not been an explosion in the total number of betting shops. The gambling prevalence study, which has been quoted by some members as to say it shows a 50% increase in problem gambling, what that shows is an increase of 0.6 to 0.9% in problem gambling on a survey taken between 2007 and 2010, that the change in numbers then on those two studies were within the margin of error, so not necessarily statistically significant at all, and other studies carried out since 2010 demonstrate the gambling incidence of problem gambling is declining. Absolutely. So this is why we have to have a sensible evidence-based approach. The scenario that the Labour Party paint out in terms of gambling on the high street, the prevalence of FOBTs, clustering of betting shops, is one that has been entirely created by the 2005 Gambling Act. And was the decision of the Labour government at that time in that Act based on robust evidence and science? No, it was based maybe with good intentions, but has led to massive unintended consequences. When Richard Cabourn gave evidence to the Select Committee, he was asked why, in particular, did the last government settle on 4 fixed-off betting terminals in betting shops? What was the reason for that number? And he said in response, "There was no magic scientific arrangement for 4, I can honestly assure you. It was an agreement saying what was reasonable and what we believed with the evidence we had at the time was proportionate, and that was exactly how it happened." So it was their best guess. And that best guess has led to the clustering of FOBTs on the high streets because there's a demand for their use and not enough premises to play them in. Bookmakers have opened new betting shops so they can have new terminals. Now, I was interested in the response to the Shadow Minister in my intervention earlier on, when I asked, looking at the wording of the Labour Party's motion on face value, it suggests that local authorities can retrospectively change the number of terminals in a shop. And he's saying only downwards. Well, I think that does refute the idea that this motion is localist in any way, or is about giving powers to local communities in any way. Because if it was, it might do what the Select Committee recommended, which is to give local authorities the power to say, well, maybe we would have more terminals in fewer shops and fewer shops on the high street and have that power and that decision. It is not a localist motion at all. It is one where the Labour Party is asking councils to do what it wants, which is to close betting shops and get rid of FOBTs altogether.
Mr. Speaker, in the little time that I've got available today, I want to restrict my remarks to the impact that these machines are having on increased criminality and money laundering on our high streets. You know, we all might criticise the 2005 Gambling Act, but it's very clearly said that gambling machines must prevent gambling from being a source of crime and disorder, being associated with crime and disorder, or being used to support crime. But that is exactly what is happening on our streets. These machines are being used to launder millions of pounds of money from criminality, from drug dealing, from loan sharking, from people trafficking, etc. I've got a particularly nasty crime family in my constituency, and the Home Secretary has spoken on numerous occasions about how the really good work that Durham County has done to tackle organised crime in County Durham. But I can tell you that the crime family in my constituency, they've been moved on from cash for crash, they've been moved on from drug dealing, etc. Where are they now? They're all over these FOBT machines. The Gambling Association admitted in September that FOBTs represent a high inherent money laundering risk. The European Union are likely to include these machines in Directive 4 on money laundering, and I'll be really interested to hear from the Minister who has summing up what she thinks about Directive 4 and including these machines in this. Even the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime has warned that these games are being used by organised crime to launder cash. So the European Union, the UN, even the government is now recognising how dangerous this is. And I particularly, despite the gambling industry and the Association of British Bookmakers' assertion that they fully comply with the law, it's clear that however inadvertently, these machines are now an integral and increasing part of the machinery of organised crime and money laundering in this country. So in the little time that I've got left, I want to plead with the government, and I hope that the government will take seriously in its review the impact of FOBTs in money laundering, the increasing use of these machines in this country, and limit the stake in FOBTs.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Speaker, this is a serious issue. It is one I've campaigned on locally, and it is one I've spoken on in this House before, and I hope that the Shadow Minister will look at my previous contributions before we're on local radio tomorrow morning, and he will see what I've said about this issue in the past. I will not be supporting the Labour motion this evening, and I will be supporting the Government's amendment, because I think actually a lot of progress is being made on this issue, and I think it is a bit rich that the tone of this debate has been very much a case of it is our fault that this is an issue of proliferation in our high streets, when actually it was the Labour Party's act that actually liberalised much of the regulations and the legislation around this that has caused a problem that we are now all concerned about. And I share the concerns of many people on both sides of the House about the impact of FOBTs are having on our constituents. But I do think that it's wrong and it's misguided for opposition members to say that this is an issue that is only applicable to those in deprived areas. I represent a constituency with areas of multiple deprivation, and the figures that are provided about the number of or the amount that's being gambled in these FOBTs machines is actually the same as that's being gambled in Sevenoaks and Tunbridge Wells, the much more affluent areas of Kent. So I think it's very difficult to say that this is an issue that is only confined to the more deprived areas of the country. But what I do think is important is that we do look at the evidence and we do collect all of the necessary data, and that we make sure that we respond accordingly to that. My only concern is, and if I to have one criticism of the government's policy on this, is that I think that this should be done quicker. I don't think that having an interim report next year, early next year, and then a report later on in the autumn is actually quick enough to have a look at how we can deal with this issue, because it is an increasing problem. And I'm actually not opposed to giving councils more flexibility to deal with clustering, but this is not exclusive to bookmakers. This is also the case with payday loan companies, with pawnbrokers, with licensed premises, and we are seeing this again all as a consequence of previous legislation. So I think that this is a problem. The other thing I just want to briefly say is that actually we don't necessarily need laws or legislation to deal with this. Medway Council, Conservative-led Medway Council, has been working with other organisations and has implemented a voluntary code of conduct with the ABB, or whatever it is, in order to try and make sure that we deal with problem gambling direct. And I think that actually is a much more sensible way to go forward, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes of that partnership.
Mr Tom Greatrix.
It's a pleasure to follow the member for Chatham and Aylesford, because she took part in a German debate I had back in April on this subject, where she made the point that she agreed with me that we should give local authorities the opportunity to provide part of the solution. I understand she won't be voting for the amendment, but I think actually the government should listen to the spirit of what she's just said, particularly around the rapidity of the research, which I think is a point that is well made. Mr Speaker, you can get odds of 66 to 1 on Fulham winning the FA Cup this season. I have my usual annual bet before the third round. They're still in the cup. Both them and Norwich tried to lose, but we're still in the cup. That's the odds that you can get. I say that just to make the point to the member for Shipley that not everybody who's got concerns about these machines are anti-gambling and find gambling an anathema. And whilst the Minister, from a sedentary position, several times during the course of this debate has indicated that the number of FOBT machines has gone down, that's not the case in my constituency. And the point about this motion and this debate is around where those machines are increasing, the number of betting shops are increasing. And I would invite him to come with me to Camberslang Main Street in my constituents and see where we now, on a very small main street, have 5 betting shops within 200 yards of each other, when previously there were less. Each one of those has got 4 machines. Now, before I had the adjournment debate, I had it in April, I took the opportunity to go into a number of betting shops in my constituency, in Glasgow, close to my constituency, and in London. Every single occasion, I saw people on the machines for long periods of time who were putting significant amounts of money into the machines. You could see that from standing within those shops, and that's something which I think the government really do need to take cognizance of, rather than saying that the number of machines have gone down, because this is a problem about proliferation, which is exactly the point that my honourable friend from the front bench was making in his speech at the start of this debate. Now, my interest in this arose from a situation in late 2011 when a constituent came to me having lost £25,000 during the course of a single month on one machine in a betting shop in my constituency. It's no surprise to me that that betting shop that he lost that amount of money in is in one of the most deprived parts of my constituency. Now, he came to me not because he thought he had a problem, but because he thought the machines were fixed. And I think that underlies the point of this. I spent some time with Hamilton Gamblers Anonymous and found a number of people, and strikingly, that a number of the younger people who are now within that group, who had accepted they had a problem and gone for help and trying to resolve that issue, had a problem that was developed because and related to these machines. That's very different from the older people who are within that group, and that's something, again, which I think the government really ought to take seriously. And there's also an issue around the staffing. We've heard a lot about the staff in the shops, and my honourable friend from Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland knows from his experience in dealing with those that people in those betting shops often feel under pressure not to report things, and they've said very clearly they want to be bookmakers, not bouncers, but they find themselves intimidated into not reporting incidents. All of these important issues, but the proliferation of shops in concentrated areas is the big issue which the government should address first.
Fiona Bruce. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 400,000 people in this country are problem gamblers, and 3.5 million are at risk of developing problem gambling. These are not small numbers, and 50% of problem gamblers reporting to the National Problem Gambling Clinic say that fixed odd betting terminals are a disproportionate cause of problem gambling. And we can see why when we hear that using these high-stake machines can take bets of £100 per game, and a loser can lose up to £18,000 in an hour. Every year in the UK, people lose over £1 billion on FOBTs. Problem gamblers using 300,000 of this. So users don't even need to be addicted for catastrophic problems to be caused to them and their families. So it's not just an individual problem, but a grave social and public health issue that we need to recognise and deal with. Phil Holsworth, who's Head of External Affairs at CAP, says, "This is Christians Against Poverty. Where we work with families where one member has a gambling problem, it is very difficult, often impossible, to provide any form of debt solution. It's not possible to put forward a solution without them receiving help or support for their addiction. This means that the other family members continue to suffer. A debt solution is very difficult to apply when gambling problems are present." Problem gambling costs society £3.24 billion a year, and the addiction of each problem gambler severely affects the lives of about 8 individuals around them. So as such, about 3 million people are now affected by problem gambling. Everyone is an individual, everyone a blighted life, and many of them are children. We need a concerted government approach, and I believe a cross-party approach, and this is urgent, to prevent and address the economic, social, health and health costs associated with problem gambling. The Salvation Army, and I pay tribute to their work in this respect, say problem gambling particularly affects the young. Problem gambling amongst young people is an emerging public health issue. In the UK, over 10% of children who gamble are problem gamblers, whilst 18% of them are at-risk gamblers. I support the phrase used by the previous speaker when he said that many people view gambling as an anathema. I do. We need to review our whole approach towards gambling. The average treatment for a problem gambler costs £675. That means £274 million will be required to treat all problem gamblers in the UK, and yet the gambling industry's contribution is just £5 million out of...
I'm extremely grateful, but just on that point, the terminals, I understand, generate about £300 million worth of tax revenue, and I just wonder, given the comments that the Honourable Lady just made, I just wonder if she's made any consideration as to the impact on the Exchequer that the changes proposed by the party opposite might have on those revenues.
Well, they might terminate that amount of tax of revenue, but actually the gross gambling yield for the industry is £5.6 billion a year. I consider that a contribution of £5 million to research, education and treatment activities relating to gambling, which equates to less than 2% of their income, is inadequate. We need, as I say, a wholesale review. I oppose the opposition's motion. That's wholly inadequate, not least because the member for Eltham who introduced it said this motion is not about problem gambling. Well, it should be. I support the government's amendment, but exhort the Minister to expedite its research and to extend its work to the devastating causes and consequences of all problem gambling, not least for the sake of our next generation.
Let's start on a note of cross-party unity. I agree with very much what the Honourable Lady has just said. I've limited time, so I'll cut directly to the chase. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, now 5 ministers on the Treasury bench. They're all very well educated, intelligent people. And I do ask them to think about the contradiction in the case they're making to the House. They say to the House that the 2005 Gambling Act was a mistake. It's given rise intentionally or unintentionally, although those of us who were in the House in 2005 will remember we were not talking about fixed odds betting terminals at any length at all. We were talking about super casinos and other matters. But they're saying that Act, introduced by a Labour government, has created a major problem. And they blame us for bringing it in and then doing nothing to correct the situation over the subsequent 5 years. Now I say to them, if there is a problem, and they accept there's a problem, we've heard that from the Minister's speech earlier today, then they have a 5-year window in which they could do something, and I challenge the Minister, would the government legislate to correct what they've been telling us in this debate today were the grave errors in the 2005 Act during this Parliament? And I lay down that challenge again to the Minister who will reply. If you seriously believe that your accusations against this side of the House are correct, that there is a serious problem, which I believe there is, and that it needs solving, which I believe it is, the ball's in your court, chum. Is your party going to bring forward legislation before the election? The second thing I would say is this. Many members on both sides of the House have rightly pointed out that if you look at the 10% of parliamentary constituencies where you have a highest use of and higher profits taken from fixed odd betting terminals, they're largely in deprived areas. They're largely in deprived areas, yes, but they're not all in deprived areas. And there's a little group which I'd like to mention to the House, which I would call tourist destinations. They include my constituency of York Central, Blackpool South, Brighton Pavilion, Bournemouth West, Cambridge, Great Yarmouth, Kensington, Norwich North, Oxford East, Torbay and the 2 Westminsters. Now, I don't believe that this proliferation of high street gambling in these tourist destinations is good for tourism. If you come to York and have a flutter on York races, that's part of your day out, and if you use £20 on a race, so be it. You can probably put that down as part of the cost of a good day. But if you come to York and lose £1,000 on one of these terminals, you will not think you've had a good day out, and you will not forget it. And I think for tourist towns, as well as these deprived areas, there's a serious problem that needs to be addressed.
I think we've had an extremely lively debate this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. It's clearly an issue that many members feel very strongly about across the chamber. Unfortunately, what we got from the Minister was breathtaking complacency and the usual blame Labour mantra, but it won't wash because it is this government that is failing to take action on the issue and that has facilitated a proliferation of FOBT machines and betting shops on our high streets. But despite her response, a number of members opposite seem to agree with us that additional powers do need to be given to local government, and it will be very interesting to see whether they rediscover their commitment to localism and vote with us in the lobbies. Now, a number of members have made, I think, really excellent speeches speeches this afternoon. I want to start with my honourable friend for East Ham, who did talk about how inadequate the powers are that local government has to control betting shops, and indeed the fact that these can be overturned on appeal. Indeed. My honourable friend from West Bromwich, who's done a lot of work on this topic, I think very helpfully pointed out to us the inadequacy of the research strategy adopted by the government on this topic. My honourable friends from Preston, Sunderland South, North West, Durham, Rutherglen and Hamilton West and York noted the prevalence of gambling outlets in low-income areas and the problems of debt that this causes and the negative impact on the high street of having too many betting shops. And my honourable friend for North West Durham also noted the rise in criminality associated with betting shops in some areas. My honourable friend from Liverpool Riverside injected a much needed degree of sense into the debate, I thought, in bringing us back to the central issue of localism that we are discussing today. And my honourable friends for Bradford South and Isloy talked about the importance of getting regulation right, not least because of the large number of people who work in this industry. Now, neither I or my colleagues object to a betting shop or two on the high street, and I recognise that the industry has in place a code to encourage responsible gambling, but this does not go far enough, as a number of honourable members have said today, and it is vital that the government takes action to recognise the wishes and needs of local communities. As many of my colleagues have highlighted, there are over 33,000 FOBT machines, making £1.5 billion each year for the big bookmakers. This is about half of their annual profits. Across the country, traditional bookies are being turned into mini casinos where people can gamble up to £300 a minute. Liverpool alone has 559 terminals, which took £607 million last year. Newham in East London has 87 betting shops with 348 terminals, and recent figures released by the Greater London Authority showed a 13% increase in betting shops in London's town centres between January 2010 and December 2012. We have heard how some players have become addicted to them and how these machines and the proliferation of betting shops that promote them are causing debt and misery, as well as acting as a magnet for crime and antisocial behaviour. We always made it clear that FOBTs were on probation, and it was said at the second reading of the 2005 Gambling Act that we would keep these under review. In 2009, when we were in government, we said that we were going to carry out that review because we were concerned about these machines. But this government has decided to do nothing. 5 years on, there has been no review. Members opposite claim that local authorities have the powers they need to regulate betting shops, yet we have heard time and time again from councillors of all parties that this is simply not the case. The next Labour government will change planning and licensing laws to give councils the right to control the number of betting shops in their area. If betting shops are not a problem, as the industry is keen to highlight, then they have nothing whatsoever to fear from this change. This is an issue with considerable cross-party agreement. As the Leader of the Opposition highlighted at PMQs today, the Mayor of London and the Conservative head of the Local Government Association have said local authorities do not have the power to limit the number of these machines. Indeed, the Prime Minister acknowledged that there is a problem in the gaming and betting industry today on PMQs, and he stated that we need to sort it out. But if he recognises the problem, then why isn't he supporting our motion this afternoon? Now, turning to the Lib Dems, in September, the Lib Dems agreed a motion at their annual conference that would give councils the power to limit the number of betting shops in their area, specifically agreeing to put betting shops in a new separate use class, even though they had previously voted against such a motion in this House, so typical Lib Dem behaviour. Now, the wording of their motion is very similar to the wording of our motion today, and I urge members opposite opposite to recognise this and to support our motion in order to implement their policy commitments. Now, there is a cost of living crisis facing the country, with the average person being £1,600 worse off since this government came to power. People are facing extreme difficulties in affording childcare, rail fares and heating their homes, while the members in the benches opposite are handing huge tax cuts out to millionaires. Millions of people are struggling, and it is at a time like this that the most vulnerable in our society need protecting. This is exactly what my colleagues and I are proposing in this motion. As the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North highlighted when he launched Labour's policy last month, in the poorest areas, these bedding shops are spreading like an epidemic along high streets, with the pawn shops and payday lenders that are becoming symbols of Britain's cost of living crisis. Our local high streets must meet the needs of local communities, not simply the wishes of betting companies and other similar groups. Now, we know, Mr. Speaker, that the most urgent case needs to be made for changing again the system of use class orders. Use classes play a central role in the planning system by defining the potential uses of buildings. The system not only protects certain uses but also streamlines the system by allowing for some changes without the need to apply for planning permission. However, over the course of last year, the government has decided to do away with the protections offered by the use class system, and in doing so has stripped communities of a say in the shape of their high streets. In May 2013, the government introduced changes to use class orders to allow retail use to change to financial institutions without planning permission for a period of 2 years, allowing the possibility of more bedding shops on our high streets, and they are also having the audacity now to say that they may make this change permanent. What we are arguing for this afternoon is that the government does what it says it wants to do and gives powers to local communities to have a say over what is happening in their high streets, that where they are identifying a problem with an over-proliferation of gambling and of betting shops, that it is local communities who are able to pull the plug on these gaming machines that are unwanted in many of our areas.
Communities and local government, Mr. Nicholas Bowles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I understand that traditionally opposition debates were designed to allow Her Majesty's opposition to attack government policy. But since 2010, when I was elected to this House, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will have noticed a constitutional innovation. The Labour Party uses these debates to attack Labour government policy, to condemn those like the Honourable Member for Bradford South who implemented those policies, and to repudiate anything inherited from the period which many of them like to think as the Blairite apostasy. So this debate is nothing more than an elaborate exercise in exorcising the ghosts of New Labour's past. Now let us examine those ghosts. In 2003, the Labour government doubled the number of gaming machines allowed in licensed premises from 2 to 4 and increased the maximum prize from £25 to £250. But that was not enough. In 2006, the Labour government saw the gambling industry as the handmaiden of regeneration for cities like Glasgow, Manchester and Newcastle. And they were not just proposing a row of little betting shops, they wanted super casinos with unlimited jackpots. Now, there are very few people on the opposite benches that I admire more than the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Dulwich and West Norwood. I believe that the Olympics would never have happened without her contribution. So in researching this debate, I wanted to read her words as Secretary of State when she was promoting gambling as the best regeneration policy for Britain's inner cities. Imagine my shock, Mr. Speaker, when I discovered that all of her speeches have been erased from the Labour Party website. Not just her speeches, Mr. Speaker, but every speech, every policy document and every press release predating the speech by the Leader of the Opposition in September 2010. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have all heard of communist regimes rewriting history and airbrushing photographs of the Politburo. But this puts Soviet measures into pale. The history of New Labour isn't just being rewritten, it's been deleted. The noble Lord Mandelson, Mr. Speaker, had better watch his step, or before we know it, he'll have gone the way of King Jong-un's uncle and been thrown to the ravenous dogs. So now, Mr. Speaker, we have established the true purpose of this debate is to heal the psychological traumas opposite. I think we can agree we're on familiar ground. The Labour Party has decided that another of its policies in government was a mistake. My honourable friends in the Liberal Democrat Party and honourable friends for Peterborough and Enfield Southgate have consistently and honourably raised concerns about that policy. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has today, in Prime Minister's questions, reaffirmed his desire to address these concerns sensibly, steadily and with evidence, and to achieve a proper balance. And my honourable friend, the member for Maidstone, set out very clearly, in a very measured way, her work with the gambling industry, with the Responsible Gambling Trust and with other bodies to conduct what that government did not do before the 2005 Gambling Act, which was research. Exactly. Research into the impact of the measures that they might bring forward. That is the research that we are doing. That is the research that my honourable friend is leading. And that is the research that will produce a result. Now, the honourable lady, my opposite number, raised the issue of planning controls and Article 4. She asked for more powers for local councils to introduce restrictions on the proliferation of betting shops on their high streets. And so, Mr. Speaker, I think I'd better introduce her to one of her colleagues, Labour councillor Fiona Colley, councillor for Southwark Council. Southwark Council, which only 3 months ago introduced some immediate Article 4 directions to prevent the conversion of I will not wait, I'm sorry, I have 2 minutes. This Labour councillor introduced an Article 4 measure with immediate effect to prevent the conversion of more premises from other use classes to that of a betting shop. And let me just quote that Labour councillor from the Southwark website. This is a Labour councillor. They might want to listen to her. She knows a lot more about this than they do. She said, Councillor Fiona Colley, soon to become my favourite councillor, this innovative, proactive approach to addressing planning legislation will make a tangible change to the lives of people living in areas where so-called financial services businesses are so prolific. So in Article 4, that this government has made easier, that this government no longer requires the Secretary of State's approval for. This Article 4 is good enough for Southwark. This Article 4 is good enough for Barking and Dagenham. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 122 local authorities have made 270 Article 4 declarations to restrict permitted development rights in the last 3 years. If even one Labour authority in London, in Southwark, can do it and thinks it's a good thing, if 121 other local authorities around the country can do it and think it's a good thing, then it seems pretty clear to me that we need no more planning changes to enable councils to do what they want to do and protect their local communities. Mr. Speaker, this debate has no doubt been helpful for the psychological catharsis of the Labour Party. And I wish them well as they come to terms with their abiding grief about the record of the last government. This government will continue to do, with the help of my colleagues in the Liberal Democrat backbenches.
Is the question being now put? As many as are that have been say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as are that have been say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Susan Ellen Jones and Nick Dakin. Tell us for the noes, Claire Perry and Jenny Willett. Here, here.
232. The noes to the left, 314.
Order. The ayes to the right, 232. The noes to the left, 314. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Aye. Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Jenny Willett and Claire Perry. Tellers for the noes, Susan Ellen Jones and Nick Dakin.